Hello friends. About 70% of the friends who watch my videos are not subscribed, and I would be really happy if you do so. Also, don't forget to hit the like button and leave your comments. Your interaction makes the content reach everyone and contributes to the growth of the channel. Thank you all. I've lived in Carver, Arkansas for as long as I can remember. Small town, population under 1,000, with just about as many problems. Not big enough to be on the map, but you know what? That's the way most of us here like it. Quiet, uneventful, except when it isn't. The year was 1993. I remember that because my oldest daughter, Amy, was about to turn 12 and she had been asking for a dog for months. I was a deputy sheriff back then, and let's just say my job gave me a whole new perspective on the idea of bringing anything else into the house that could pee on the floor. Carver's the kind of town where nothing happens until everything does. And when things go south, they go real far. Like the summer when old man Rigby decided to chase his cows down Main Street in a fit of drunken rage. Or the time the whole football team got food poisoning right before the state championships. Real chaos, right? But there's something that stands out in my memory above all that nonsense. Something that still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand on end. It was a Tuesday morning in July when the call came in. I was just settling into my shift at the station, nursing a lukewarm cup of coffee and flipping through paperwork. Deputy Wilson, Marge, our dispatcher, called out. Got a missing person report. Henderson family out on Hickory Ridge. Their boy Bobby didn't come home last night. I felt a knot form in my stomach. Missing kids weren't common in Carver, but when it happened, it was never good. How old? I asked, already reaching for my keys. 13, Marge replied, her voice tight. Parents say he went out to play near the woods yesterday afternoon, never came back. I nodded, though Marge couldn't see me. I'm on it. Tell the Hendersons I'll be there in 20. The drive out to Hickory Ridge was quiet, too quiet. No birds singing, no cicadas buzzing, just the crunch of gravel under my tires and the hum of the air conditioning fighting against the oppressive summer heat. The Henderson place came into view, an old white clapboard shack that had seen better days. Bill Henderson was standing out front, his face pale, hands shaking as he talked to one of the other deputies who'd arrived before me. Bill wasn't the type to get rattled easily. He was a farmer, built solid, the kind of man who could lift a bale of hay without breaking a sweat. Seeing him like that made the pit in my stomach grow a little deeper. Bill, I called out as I got out of the cruiser, tell me what happened. He turned to me, eyes red-rimmed and desperate. Bobby's been gone since yesterday afternoon. He said he was going to play near the woods, but he never came back. We've been looking all night, nothing. That's when I saw the dog, a scrappy mutt tied to the porch. It was whining, scratching at the door like it wanted nothing more than to get inside. Strange thing was, the dog's fur was matted, covered in mud and something else I couldn't quite identify. Maybe blood. You think it's his? I gestured toward the animal. Bill shook his head. That dog hasn't left the yard. It's too scared to go near the woods. Now that's when it hit me. I'd seen scared dogs before. Hell, my cousin's pit bull once ran straight into a glass door after a thunderclap. But this was different. This dog wasn't just spooked, it was terrified. The kind of terror that's instinctual, primal, like it knew something was out there, something it wanted no part of. All right, I said, pulling my flashlight from my belt. Let's see if we can't find him. I started walking toward the woods, Bill following behind. The trees loomed overhead, casting long shadows despite the sun sitting high in the sky. The farther we went in, the quieter it got. No birds, no bugs, just silence. We split up, me going north along the creek bed while Bill went west toward the old barn. I'd been walking for about 10 minutes when I found the first sign. A sneaker, mud-caked, half buried in the muck near a thicket of brush. It was Bobby's, no doubt about it. The kid had a thing for those bright red Nike high tops. I bent down to grab it, my hand brushing something wet. At first I thought it was just the mud, but then I noticed the smell. Coppery, metallic, blood. My heart raced as I keyed my radio. This is Wilson, I found something, send backup to my location. I gave them rough directions, knowing they'd be able to track my position. As I waited for the others to arrive, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. The woods seemed to close in, the shadows deepening, and somewhere, just beyond my sight, I could have sworn I heard something moving. The search party arrived within the hour, a mix of deputies, volunteers, and a couple of state troopers who happened to be passing through. We spread out in a grid pattern, combing through the underbrush and calling Bobby's name. But as the day wore on and the sun began to set, we hadn't found anything more than that bloody sneaker. I couldn't get the image of that terrified dog out of my mind. Something had spooked it bad, and I had a sinking feeling that whatever it was, it had something to do with Bobby's disappearance. As darkness fell, we switched on our flashlights. The woods took on a different character at night. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps. I found myself jumping at every little noise, my hand never far from my holster. "Deputy Wilson," a voice crackled over my radio. It was Sheriff Gaines. "We're calling it for the night. Too dangerous to keep searching in the dark. We'll pick it up again at first light." I keyed my radio to respond, but something stopped me. A sound barely audible over the static of the radio. A low, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Sheriff," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "I think I heard something. I'm going to check it out." "Negative, Wilson. Get back to base camp. That's an order." But I was already moving, drawn toward the sound like a moth to a flame. I knew I was being stupid, knew I should turn back. But something in my gut told me I was close. The wail came again, louder this time. It sounded almost human, but not quite. There was something off about it, something that made my skin crawl. I pushed through a thick patch of underbrush, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, and that's when I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear. It was hunched over something on the ground, its back to me. But as my light hit it, it turned, and I realized with a jolt of terror that this was no bear. It was like a wolf, but not quite. Bigger, with shoulders broader than any animal I'd ever seen. Its skin was gray, leathery, and stretched too tight over its frame. There were patches of fur, but not enough to make it seem natural. And its head was too big, too wide, with a jaw that looked like it could snap a man in half. It was gnawing on something that looked horribly, sickeningly human. I didn't run, I should have, but I couldn't move. My brain was still trying to process what I was seeing, trying to find some logical explanation for the nightmare in front of me. The thing didn't seem to notice me at first, too focused on its meal. But then, without warning, it stopped and looked right at me. I swear to God it smiled. Not a snarl, not a growl, but a smile, like it knew something I didn't, like it was amused that I had wandered into its territory. That's when it lunged. I didn't even have time to think. My hand went to my sidearm, but I fumbled it. The thing was fast, faster than any animal had the right to be. It was on me in seconds, claws raking across my chest. I fell backward, the wind knocked out of me, but somehow I managed to roll out of the way before it could tear into me again. I scrambled to my feet, drawing my gun this time and firing 3 shots straight into its chest. The bullets hit, but they didn't stop it, just pissed it off. It let out a screech that echoed through the trees, a sound so loud it made my ears ring. But then something strange happened. The thing stopped. It stood there panting, blood dripping from its chest, and for a moment it just stared at me like it was thinking. Then without a sound it turned and bolted into the woods, vanishing between the trees. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, waiting for it to come back, but it never did. When I finally got my bearings, I radioed for backup. The others found me a few minutes later, bleeding but alive. They didn't find Bobby. We searched the woods for days, but there was no trace of him. No sign of the thing I'd seen. The only evidence we had was the blood-soaked ground and the sneaker I'd found near the creek. As I sat in the back of an ambulance getting patched up, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. That whatever I had seen out there in those woods, it wasn't done with us yet. The next few days passed in a blur of painkillers, questioning, and sleepless nights. My wounds weren't life-threatening, but they were deep enough to keep me off active duty for a while. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that thing, its leathery skin, its too wide mouth, those eyes that seemed to look right through me. The official report called it an animal attack. Mountain lion, most likely, but I knew better. I'd seen mountain lions before, and whatever that thing was, it wasn't any kind of cat I'd ever encountered. Word spread quickly in Carver. By the time I was released from the hospital, the whole town was buzzing with rumors. Some folks believed my story, others, well, let's just say I got a lot of sideways looks when I walked down Main Street. Bill Henderson never forgave me for not finding his son. I don't blame him. The loss of a child is something no parent should have to endure, and having no closure, no body to bury, that's a special kind of hell. It was about a week after the incident when Sheriff Gaines called me into his office. He looked tired, the kind of bone-deep exhaustion that comes from too many sleepless nights and too much coffee. "Wilson," he said, gesturing for me to sit. "We need to talk about what happened out there." I nodded, settling into the chair across from his desk. "Yes, sir." He leaned forward, his eyes searching my face. "Now, I've known you a long time. You're a good deputy, reliable, level-headed. But this story you're telling, it's causing a lot of problems." "It's not a story, Sheriff," I said, my voice tight. "It's what happened." He held up a hand. "I'm not saying I don't believe you saw something out there, but a monster? Some kind of... what, werewolf? You've got to understand how that sounds." I did understand. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't have believed it either. But I knew what I saw, and I wasn't about to back down. "With all due respect, sir, I know what I saw, and whatever it was, it's still out there. We need to warn people, organize a proper hunt." "Enough," Gaines cut me off. "Listen, Wilson, the state boys are taking over the Henderson case. As far as they're concerned, it's a missing person, possibly a homicide. There's no evidence of any creature." I opened my mouth to argue, but he kept going. "I'm putting you on desk duty for the next month. Use the time to rest, get your head straight, and for the love of God, stop talking about monsters. You're scaring people." I left the sheriff's office feeling defeated. How could I make them understand? How could I convince them of the danger when I could barely believe it myself? As I walked to my car, I noticed a group of teenagers hanging around the corner store. They fell silent as I approached, eyes following me. I caught snippets of their whispered conversation as I passed. "That's him. Says he saw a monster. Probably drunk." I quickened my pace, eager to get home, but as I reached for my car door, I felt a hand on my shoulder. I spun around, heart racing, half expecting to see that thing from the woods. Instead, I found myself face to face with old Pete, the town's resident eccentric. Pete was pushing 80, with a wild beard and eyes that never seemed to focus on anything in particular. Most folks in town wrote him off as a harmless kook, but there was something about him that always set me on edge. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said, his voice low and urgent. "Out there in the woods. You saw what takes the children." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you know about it, Pete?" He glanced around as if afraid someone might overhear. "Meet me at the library tomorrow, noon. I'll tell you everything." Before I could respond, he shuffled off, leaving me standing there with more questions than answers. As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was on the edge of something big, something that went beyond missing children and strange creatures in the woods, something that might just change everything I thought I knew about Carver, and about the world itself. The next day, I found myself at the Carver Public Library, a small dusty building that had seen better days. Old Pete was already there, hunched over a table in the back, surrounded by stacks of yellowed newspapers and ancient-looking books. "Sit down, deputy," he said without looking up. "We've got a lot to cover." I settled into the chair across from him, wincing as the movement pulled at my healing wounds. "All right, Pete. What's this all about?" He pushed a newspaper clipping towards me. The paper was brittle with age, the ink faded, but I could still make out the headline, "Child Vanishes from Woods, Wild Animal Suspected." "That's from 1952, Pete said, "but it ain't the first. Look at these." He spread out more clippings, each yellower and more fragile than the last. 1937, 1918, 1899, all with the same story. Children disappearing in the woods around Carver, bodies never found. "This has been happening for over a century," I said, my mind reeling. Pete nodded. "Longer, much longer. The settlers who founded Carver, they chose this spot because the native tribes avoided it. Said the woods were haunted by evil spirits that stole children." I leaned back, trying to process what I was hearing. "So you're saying this thing has been here all along?" "Not just one thing," Pete said, his voice dropping to a whisper. There's more than one, a whole pack of them. They sleep for years, decades sometimes. Then they wake up hungry. The image of that creature in the woods flashed through my mind. The thought of there being more of them out there made my blood run cold. Why hasn't anyone done anything about this? I asked. Pete let out a bitter laugh. Oh, they've tried. Every generation or so, someone figures it out, tries to raise the alarm, but people don't want to believe. It's easier to blame wild animals or drifters or just write it off as tragic accidents. And those creatures, they're smart. They know how to cover their tracks. I spent the rest of the afternoon poring over Pete's research. The more I read, the more convinced I became that he was right. This wasn't just about Bobby Henderson. This was about generations of children who had fallen victim to something ancient and evil. As the sun began to set, I gathered up the most relevant documents. I need to borrow these, I told Pete. I'm going to make the sheriff listen. Pete grabbed my arm, his grip surprisingly strong for such an old man. Be careful, deputy. These things, they don't like it when people start asking questions. And they ain't the only ones who want to keep this quiet. I left the library with my head spinning, questions piling up faster than I could process them. Who else knew about this? How deep did the cover-up go? And most importantly, how could we stop these creatures? As I drove home, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. Every rustle in the trees could be the approach of one of those creatures. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my knuckles turning white. When I got home, I found my wife, Laura, waiting up for me. The concern in her eyes was evident as she took in my haggard appearance. You look terrible, she said, pulling me into a hug. What's going on, John? I hesitated, unsure of how much to tell her. I didn't want to drag her into this nightmare, but I also knew I couldn't keep her in the dark. Not about something this big. I think I'm onto something, I said finally. About Bobby Henderson, about other missing kids. Laura's eyes widened. What do you mean, other missing kids? I spent the next hour explaining everything I'd learned from Pete, showing her the newspaper clippings and the patterns I'd noticed. To her credit, she listened without interrupting, her expression growing more serious with each passing minute. When I finished, she was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked me in the eye and said, "What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath. I'm going to find proof, real, undeniable proof, and then I'm going to make them listen. The next few weeks were a blur of sleepless nights and clandestine research. I spent every free moment digging deeper into Carver's history, cross-referencing Pete's information with official records and local legends. It was during one of these late-night research sessions that I met her. I was at the county records office rifling through old property deeds when I heard a voice behind me. You're looking in the wrong place. I spun around to find a woman standing there. She was tall with sharp features and eyes that seemed to see right through me. She introduced herself as Dr. Eleanor Reeves, a folklorist from the State University. I've been studying the legends of this area for years, she told me. I think we might be working on the same problem. At first I was wary, but as we talked I realized that Dr. Reeves knew things that lined up perfectly with what I'd seen and what Pete had told me. She had her own theories about the creatures, drawn from folklore and mythology from around the world. In every culture there are stories of creatures that prey on the young, she explained. The boo-hag in the South, the wendigo in Native American lore, the strigoi in Eastern Europe. What if they are all talking about the same thing? Together we pored over her research and mine. We found patterns, connections we'd missed before. The creatures seemed to have a cycle, periods of activity followed by long stretches of dormancy. And each time they woke, it coincided with certain astronomical events. Look, Dr. Reeves said, pointing to a star chart. The next alignment is in 3 days. If the pattern holds, they'll be hunting again, I finished, a chill running down my spine. We worked frantically to compile our evidence, to build a case that even the most skeptical would have to take seriously. But as the deadline approached, strange things started happening. My house was broken into, but nothing was taken. Just my research scattered and destroyed. Dr. Reeves reported similar incidents, and everywhere we went we felt eyes on us, watching, waiting. The night before we were set to present our findings to the sheriff and the town council, I got a call from Dr. Reeves. Her voice was panicked, breathless. "John, they're here. They found me. You need to—" The line went dead. I raced to her hotel, my heart pounding, but when I got there, the room was empty. No sign of struggle, no trace of Dr. Reeves. Just a single piece of paper on the bed with 2 words scrawled on it. "They know." With Dr. Reeves gone and our evidence scattered, I knew I was running out of time. The alignment was tonight, and if we were right, the creatures would be on the hunt again. I gathered what was left of our research and headed to the sheriff's office. I didn't care if they thought I was crazy anymore. I had to make them listen. Sheriff Gaines was not happy to see me. "Wilson, I thought I told you to drop this," he growled. "People are going to die if we don't act now," I said, spreading out our findings on his desk. "Look at this. The pattern, the evidence. It's all here." For a moment, I thought I saw something flicker in Gaines's eyes. Recognition? Fear? But it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "This is nonsense," he said, sweeping the papers aside. "I won't have you spreading panic based on fairy tales and coincidences." "Then come with me," I pleaded. "Tonight, into the woods. See for yourself." Maybe it was the desperation in my voice, or maybe some part of him wanted to believe. Whatever the reason, Gaines agreed. As night fell, we gathered a small group, myself, Gaines, and 2 other deputies. We headed into the woods, armed and on high alert. The forest was unnaturally quiet, just like that day when Bobby disappeared. We moved slowly, our flashlights cutting through the darkness. That's when we heard it. A low, keening wail, the same sound I'd heard before. Gaines's face went pale. "What the hell was that?" he whispered. Before I could answer, something burst from the underbrush. It was one of them. Gray skin, 2 wide mouth, eyes gleaming in the darkness. Gunshots rang out. The creature stumbled but didn't fall. Instead, it let out an ear-splitting screech, and then they were everywhere, coming from all sides, moving faster than anything I'd ever seen. We fought, we ran, we regrouped, but they were always 1 step ahead. In the chaos, I got separated from the others. I found myself alone in a small clearing, my back against a tree, gun raised. That's when I saw him. Bobby Henderson, or what was left of him. He was changed. His skin gray and leathery, his eyes wild and inhuman. He looked at me and smiled, showing too many teeth. "Oh, Bobby," I whispered, "I'm so sorry." What happened next is still a blur. There was fighting, screaming, flashes of gunfire. I remember Gaines yelling, the sound of bones snapping, the hot spray of blood. And then suddenly, it was over. The creatures retreated, melting into the shadows as quickly as they had appeared. I found myself standing in the middle of the clearing, covered in blood and gore, surrounded by the bodies of creatures and humans alike. Gaines was there, barely alive, his eyes wide with shock and understanding. "You were right," he gasped. "God help us. You were right." As the sun began to rise, casting long shadows through the trees, I knew that nothing would ever be the same again. The official story was that we'd stumbled upon a group of feral animals, maybe escaped exotic pets or some kind of mutated wildlife. The bodies of the creatures were whisked away before anyone else could see them, supposedly for testing. Gaines survived, barely, but he was never the same after that night. He retired a month later, moving away from Carver without so much as a goodbye. The town was in shock. Even those who hadn't believed me before couldn't deny that something terrible had happened in those woods. People started locking their doors at night. Parents kept their children close. Dr. Reeves was never found. Sometimes I wonder if she's out there somewhere, still searching for answers, or if she became another victim of the creatures we'd tried to expose. As for me, I couldn't stay in Carver, not after everything that had happened. I resigned from the sheriff's department and moved my family to the city, but I couldn't let it go. I knew there were more out there, more creatures, more victims. I started traveling, following leads, connecting with others who'd had similar experiences. I learned that Carver wasn't unique. These things were everywhere, hiding in the shadows of small towns and big cities alike. But every time I got close to exposing the truth, something would happen. Evidence would disappear. Witnesses would go silent. It was like fighting against the tide. Years passed. My obsession took its toll on my family. Laura left, taking the kids with her. I couldn't blame her. How could I explain that I was trying to save the world from monsters that most people didn't believe existed? It's been 30 years since that night in the woods. I'm an old man now, living alone in a small apartment filled with files and maps and blurry photographs. Most people think I'm just another crazy conspiracy theorist. Maybe they're right. But I know the truth, and I know they're still out there. Sometimes late at night I hear noises outside my window, scratching, whispering, the sound of something moving just out of sight. I tell myself it's just the wind, or stray cats, or my imagination playing tricks on me. But deep down I know better. I keep my gun close. I check the locks twice, 3 times before I go to bed. And every night I wonder if this will be the night they finally come for me. Because I know too much. I've seen too much. And they don't like loose ends. To whoever finds this record, believe me or don't, it doesn't matter. But watch the shadows. Listen for the sounds that don't belong. And whatever you do, don't go into the woods alone. They're waiting. They're always waiting. And they're hungry. I've always been more comfortable among trees than people. Maybe it's because I grew up an only child in Greenridge, Pennsylvania, a town so small it barely registers on most maps. My name's Dexter Bellamy, but folks around here just call me Dex. Born and raised in this little speck of civilization nestled in the vast Pennsylvania forests, I thought I knew every creaky floorboard in town and every hidden trail in the woods. Boy, was I wrong. My parents were always working, leaving me to my own devices more often than not. The forest became my babysitter, my playground, and my confidant. My dad used to joke that if I didn't have twigs in my hair and dirt on my jeans, I must be sick. He wasn't far off. As I grew older, my bond with the woods only strengthened. While other kids my age were glued to their phones or hanging out at the local diner, I was out there exploring every nook and cranny of the forest. I learned to track animals, to identify plants, to navigate by the stars. The forest was my second home, a place where I felt truly alive. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, even in a place as seemingly unchanging as Greenridge. In the summer of 2017, I found myself nursing a broken heart. Mirabelle, my first real love, had decided to leave town for college, ending our relationship in the process. The breakup hit me hard, leaving me feeling lost and alone in a town that suddenly seemed too small and suffocating. That's when I decided to take a solo camping trip. Nothing big, just an overnight stay to clear my head and escape the pitying glances and awkward silences of friends who didn't know what to say. Little did I know, this simple trip would change my life forever. I packed light, a tent, sleeping bag, some food, water, and my trusty Swiss Army knife. My destination was an old spot I hadn't visited in years, a small, secluded lake deep within the forest. I had discovered it as a kid, a place where the water was always cool, the fish plentiful, and the trees seemed to whisper secrets if you listened hard enough. As I set out early that morning, the sun barely peeking over the horizon, I felt a sense of anticipation. The familiar weight of my backpack, the crunch of leaves under my boots, the crisp scent of pine in the air. It all felt right. For the first time since the breakup, I felt like I could breathe again. But as I made my way deeper into the forest, following trails I hadn't used in years, an odd feeling began to creep over me. The woods seemed different somehow. The shadows a little deeper, the silence a little more complete. I shrugged it off, blaming it on my recent emotional turmoil and the fact that I hadn't been this far out in a while. By noon I reached the lake. It was just as I remembered, a shimmering mirror in the midst of the greenery. I set up my tent, started a small fire, and decided to do some fishing. The afternoon drifted by in a lazy haze. I caught a couple of trout, cooked them over the fire, and enjoyed a simple meal seasoned with nothing but a bit of salt and the satisfaction of self-reliance. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the clearing, I felt a slight chill in the air. Nothing I couldn't handle, I thought, as I built up the fire and settled in for the night. Little did I know this peaceful scene was about to shatter, plunging me into a nightmare I could never have imagined. The fire crackled softly, its warm glow a comforting barrier against the encroaching darkness. I was half asleep, lost in thoughts of Mirabelle and the life I thought we'd have together, when I heard it, a rustling in the bushes behind me. At first I didn't think much of it. Living in Greenridge, you get used to the sounds of the forest at night, but as I listened, I realized this was different. The sound was heavier, more deliberate. This wasn't a deer or a raccoon. I sat up, every sense suddenly on high alert. "Who's there?" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. There was no response, just more rustling, closer now. I grabbed my knife and stood up, backing slowly towards the fire. The light would give me some advantage, at least. That's what I told myself anyway. The rustling stopped, and for a moment, everything was deathly silent. Then, out of the darkness, stepped the strangest, most terrifying creature I'd ever seen. It was tall, at least 7 feet, covered in coarse, matted hair. Its limbs were long and sinewy, moving with a disturbing fluidity that seemed almost unnatural. It had a hunched back, and its hands, or were they claws, were huge, ending in sharp, curved talons that gleamed in the firelight. For a split second, I thought it was some sort of elaborate prank. Maybe the guys back in town had decided to scare the city out of me. But then it moved, and the way it moved, there was nothing human about it. I froze, my mind racing. Fight or flight? But where could I run? The creature was between me and the trail back to town. My heart pounded in my chest as it let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but more guttural, more primal. It advanced slowly, and I realized with a sickening clarity that this was no prank. This was real, and I was in serious danger. I held out my knife, a pitifully small defense against this monstrous thing. "Stay back," I shouted, hoping to scare it off. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it tilted its head as if considering me, evaluating. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. I barely had time to react. I slashed out with my knife, managing to nick its arm, but it was like cutting through leather. The creature let out a shriek, more of anger than pain, and swiped at me with one of its claws. I felt a sharp pain in my side and stumbled back, blood seeping through my shirt. Adrenaline kicked in, and I scrambled to my feet, running towards the lake. Maybe I could swim across or find a hiding spot among the rocks on the far side. But the creature was fast, unnaturally so. It caught up to me within seconds, knocking me to the ground. I kicked out, connecting with its leg, and for a moment it backed off. I took the chance to scramble up, clutching my side where its claws had raked me. The pain was intense, but I couldn't stop. I stumbled towards the water, hearing the creature's heavy footsteps behind me. Just as I reached the edge of the lake, it caught me again, this time slamming me into the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I gasped for air, struggling to stay conscious. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. But fate, it seemed, had other plans. Just as I was sure the creature was about to finish me off, a deafening bang echoed through the clearing. The monster screeched and recoiled, looking around wildly. I managed to turn my head and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a shotgun. "Get away from him!" the figure shouted, firing another shot. The creature snarled but retreated into the forest, disappearing into the darkness as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there gasping as my savior approached. It was an old man, his face lined with age and weathered by years in the wilderness. "Hang in there, son," he said, kneeling beside me. "We need to get you to a doctor." He helped me to my feet, supporting my weight as we made our way back to his cabin, which was a short distance from the lake. The pain in my side was excruciating, but the old man moved quickly, his eyes constantly scanning the forest around us. Once we reached his cabin, he helped me inside and sat me down on a worn but comfortable chair. "Name's Virgil," he said as he bustled around gathering first aid supplies. "Been living out here for decades. Seen that thing a few times, but never this close." "What is it?" I managed to ask, my voice weak. Virgil shook his head as he began to clean and bandage my wounds. "Don't rightly know. Some folks say it's a Bigfoot, others think it's some kind of mutant bear. All I know is it's dangerous." He worked quickly and efficiently, his gnarled hands surprisingly gentle as he tended to my injuries. When he was done, he handed me a glass of water and some pills. "For the pain," he explained. I took them gratefully, wincing as I shifted in the chair. "Thank you," I said. "If you hadn't shown up when you did..." Virgil waved off my thanks. "No need for that. Couldn't just stand by and watch. Now you need to rest. We'll head into town in the morning to get you proper medical attention." He helped me to a small cot in the corner of the cabin, then took up position by the window, his shotgun across his lap. "Get some sleep," he said. "I'll keep watch." As I drifted off, my mind swirling with questions and the image of that creature burned into my memory, I heard Virgil mutter to himself, "It's getting bolder. This isn't good. Not good at all." The next morning, Virgil helped me back to town. Every step was agony, but the old man was patient, letting me set the pace and rest when I needed to. We made quite a sight as we limped into Greenridge. Me, battered and bloodied, leaning heavily on this grizzled old hermit that most folks in town had only heard whispered stories about. Virgil took me straight to the local clinic, where Dr. Harriet Chen, who'd been patching up the scrapes and broken bones of Greenridge residents for as long as I could remember, took one look at me and ushered us into an examination room. "What in the world happened to you, Dex?" she asked as she carefully examined my wounds. I hesitated, glancing at Virgil. How much should I say? Would anyone even believe me? Virgil nodded encouragingly. "Tell her the truth, son. Dr. Chen's one of the few in this town who'll listen." So I did. I told her everything, the camping trip, the creature, Virgil's timely rescue. As I spoke, Dr. Chen's expression grew increasingly grave. When I finished, she was silent for a long moment. Then she said, "I've lived in Greenridge my whole life, and I've heard stories, but I never thought—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "Well, the important thing is you're alive. These wounds are deep, but with proper care, they should heal without too much scarring." She insisted I stay at the clinic for a few days to recover and to make sure infection didn't set in. As she was finishing up, Virgil cleared his throat. "Doc," he said, "I reckon it might be best if we keep the details of this incident between us for now. No need to cause a panic." Dr. Chen nodded. "Agreed. I'll list this as an animal attack in my records, which I suppose isn't far from the truth." As Virgil turned to leave, I called out, "Wait, I thank you for everything." He gave me a small smile. "You rest up, son. We'll talk more when you're on your feet again." Over the next few days, as I recovered in the clinic, news of my animal attack spread through Greenridge like wildfire. Visitors trickled in, friends, neighbors, even my ex-girlfriend Mirabelle, all curious about what had happened. I stuck to the story Dr. Chen and I had agreed on, that I'd been attacked by a bear while camping. Most accepted this without question. After all, bear attacks, while rare, weren't unheard of in our neck of the woods. But I could see the doubt in some of their eyes. They'd known me all my life, knew how comfortable I was in the forest. A bear catching me off guard? It didn't quite add up. Casey, my best friend since childhood, cornered me on the third day. "Come on, Dex," he said, his voice low. "What really happened out there?" I sighed, feeling the weight of the secret pressing down on me. "You wouldn't believe me if I told you, Case." He leaned in, his eyes serious. "Try me." So I did. I told him everything, just as I had told Dr. Chen. When I finished, Casey was silent for a long time. "That's quite a story," he said finally. "You think I'm crazy," I said, resigned. Casey shook his head. "I've known you too long to think that. But Dex, this is big, if what you're saying is true." "I know," I interrupted. "That's why we're keeping it quiet for now. But Case, be careful out there, okay? Especially at night." He nodded solemnly. "You got it. And Dex, thanks for trusting me with this." As he left, I felt a mix of relief and apprehension. It was good to have someone else know the truth, someone I could talk to about it. But I also knew that the more people who knew, the more likely it was that word would spread. And something told me that attention was the last thing we needed right now. A week after the attack, I was finally released from the clinic. My side was still tender, and Dr. Chen warned me to take it easy. But I was glad to be out of that sterile room and back in my own space. The first thing I did was head out to Virgil's cabin. I owed him more than just a thank you, and I had questions, lots of them. The old man seemed pleased to see me up and about. He invited me in and poured us both a cup of strong black coffee. "Figured you'd be back," he said, settling into a worn armchair. "Got questions, I expect." I nodded, taking a sip of the coffee. It was bitter and strong, jolting me fully awake. "How long have you known about that thing?" Virgil sighed, his weathered face creasing with worry. "First saw it about 30 years ago. Was just a glimpse, mind you. Thought I was seeing things. But over the years I kept catching sight of it. Started hearing stories too. Hikers gone missing, livestock found torn apart. Why haven't you told anyone? I asked. He chuckled humorlessly. Who'd believe me? Old man living alone in the woods talking about monsters? They'd lock me up. Sides for a long time it kept its distance. Wasn't until recent years it started getting bolder. I leaned forward, wincing slightly at the pull on my wounds. What changed? Virgil shrugged. Can't say for sure, but if I had to guess, we're pushing further into its territory. New housing developments, that fancy resort they're building up north. We're boxing it in. The implications of that were chilling. If the creature was feeling threatened, cornered, who knew what it might do? We need to do something, I said. Warn people at least. Virgil nodded slowly. Agree with you there, but we gotta be smart about it. Can't just go hollering about monsters. Need proof. And so began our investigation. Over the next few weeks, Virgil and I spent every spare moment combing through old newspapers, town records, anything we could get our hands on. We were looking for patterns, missing persons reports, unexplained animal attacks, anything that might be connected to the creature. We found more than we bargained for. There were dozens of incidents over the years that could potentially be linked to the creature. Hikers who went into the woods and never came out. Hunters found dead, their bodies mangled in ways that didn't match any known animal attack. Even a few cases of entire families vanishing from isolated cabins, leaving behind signs of a violent struggle. Most of these had been written off as bear attacks, or in some cases as the work of human predators. But looking at them all together, a chilling pattern emerged. It's been here all along, I said one evening, staring at the map we'd created, red pins marking each incident. All this time and no one realized. Virgil nodded grimly. Folks see what they want to see. Easier to blame a bear or a psycho than face the idea of something unnatural. But our investigation didn't stop with historical records. We also started venturing into the woods, searching for physical evidence. It was on one of these excursions that we had our next encounter, one that would provide the proof we so desperately needed, but at a terrible cost. It was a crisp autumn day when Virgil and I set out on what would turn out to be our most fateful expedition. We had been combing the woods for weeks, looking for any sign of the creature tracks, hair, anything that could provide concrete evidence of its existence. This time we ventured further than we ever had before, deep into a part of the forest that even I, with all my years of exploration, had never seen. The trees here were old, their gnarled branches forming a dense canopy that blocked out most of the sunlight. Keep your eyes peeled, Virgil muttered, his shotgun at the ready. Something about this place feels off. I nodded, gripping my own weapon tighter. Since the attack, I'd taken to carrying a hunting rifle whenever we went into the woods. The weight of it was reassuring, even if I wasn't sure how effective it would be against the creature if we encountered it again. We had been walking for hours when we came across the cave. It was well hidden, the entrance barely visible behind a curtain of vines and moss. But there was something about it that drew our attention, a faint, musty odor that set the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. Virgil and I exchanged a look. Without a word, we both knew this was it. This had to be the creature's lair. We should come back, I whispered. Bring more people, better equipment. But Virgil shook his head. Might not get another chance, he said. We need that proof, Dex, now or never. Reluctantly, I nodded. We clicked on our flashlights and with hearts pounding, entered the cave. The smell hit us first, a powerful stench of decay and something else, something musky and animal. Our flashlight beams danced across the cave walls, revealing claw marks gouged deep into the stone. And then we saw them, the bones. Scattered across the cave floor were the remains of what had to be dozens of animals, and horrifyingly, what looked like human bones as well. My God, I breathed, feeling sick to my stomach. Virgil was already pulling out his camera, snapping pictures as quickly as he could. This is it, he said, his voice a mix of triumph and dread. This is the proof we need. But our victory was short-lived. A low, rumbling growl echoed through the cave, freezing us in our tracks. Slowly we turned towards the sound. There, at the back of the cave, stood the creature. In the beam of our flashlights, it looked even more terrifying than I remembered. Its eyes gleamed with an unnatural intelligence. and its lips were pulled back in a snarl, revealing rows of sharp teeth. "Run!" Virgil shouted, pushing me towards the entrance. We bolted, the creature's roar shaking the very ground beneath our feet. I could hear it behind us, gaining quickly. We burst out of the cave, sprinting through the forest. Branches whipped at our faces, roots threatened to trip us, but we didn't slow down. The creature was right behind us, its hot breath practically on our necks. Virgil, older and slower, was falling behind. "Keep going," he yelled to me. "Don't stop." I wanted to wait for him, to help him, but I knew that would mean death for both of us. So I ran, my lungs burning, my side aching where my barely healed wounds were being strained to their limit. I heard Virgil cry out, followed by a terrible ripping sound. I wanted to turn back to help him, but terror kept me moving forward. It wasn't until I burst out of the tree line, stumbling onto the road that led back to town, that I finally stopped. I turned, expecting to see the creature right behind me, but there was nothing, just the silent, ominous face of the forest. Virgil was gone, and I was alone with the terrible truth of what we'd discovered. The next few days passed in a blur of grief, guilt, and fear. I reported Virgil as missing, but I knew in my heart that he was gone. The police organized a search party, but they found no trace of him in the woods. I couldn't tell them the truth. Who would believe me? Instead, I said we had gotten separated while hiking. It wasn't a lie, not really, but the weight of the full truth pressed down on me, threatening to crush me. It was Casey who finally got me to open up. He came to my house a week after Virgil's disappearance, concern etched on his face. "Dex," he said, sitting across from me at my kitchen table. "You gotta talk to me, man. What really happened out there?" And so, for the second time, I told him everything. This time I held nothing back. I told him about our investigation, about the cave, about the creature that had taken Virgil. As I spoke, I pulled out the evidence we had gathered, the newspaper clippings, the maps, and finally, the camera we had recovered from where Virgil had dropped it in our flight from the cave. Casey listened in stunned silence. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he picked up the camera. "Have you looked at these photos yet?" he asked. I shook my head. I hadn't been able to bring myself to do it, knowing that they likely contained Virgil's last moments. Casey turned on the camera and began to scroll through the images. His eyes widened. "Dex," he said, his voice hushed, "you need to see this." The photos were clear, despite the low light of the cave. They showed the bones, the claw marks, and in the last few images, the creature itself. It was unmistakable, its features captured in horrifying detail. "This is it," Casey said. "This is the proof you were looking for." I nodded, a mix of emotions churning inside me. We had what we needed to convince people, to warn them of the danger, but at what cost? "What do we do now?" Casey asked. I took a deep breath. "We take this to the authorities, to everyone. The whole town needs to know what's out there." And so began the most difficult fight of my life. Armed with our evidence, Casey and I went to the police, to the mayor, to anyone who would listen. At first we were dismissed as crackpots or pranksters, but as more people saw the photos, as we laid out all the evidence we had gathered, people began to take notice. A town meeting was called. Standing before my friends and neighbors, I told my story. I showed them the pictures, the maps of disappearances and attacks. I saw the disbelief in their eyes turn to fear, then to determination. The revelation shook Greenridge to its core. Some people panicked, talking about leaving town. Others wanted to form hunting parties to kill the creature. It took all of my persuasion to convince them that charging into the woods would only lead to more deaths. Instead, a plan was formed. The town would erect fences, install security cameras in the woods. Hunting and camping in certain areas would be restricted. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. As for me, I knew my life would never be the same. The woods that had once been my sanctuary now held a darker meaning. But I also knew that I couldn't turn my back on them. Someone needed to stand guard, to keep watch over the boundary between our world and the darker, wilder one that lurked just beyond the tree line. In Virgil's memory, I vowed to be that person. It's been 5 years since that fateful day in the cave. 5 years since Greenridge learned the truth about what lurked in the shadows of our forests. Life here has changed in ways I never could have imagined. The town has adapted to its new reality. The fences and cameras have helped, but more importantly, people are aware now. They're cautious. The woods are still used for recreation, but no one goes in alone anymore. No one stays after dark. There have been a few more sightings of the creature over the years, but thankfully, no more attacks. Whether it's because of our precautions or because the creature has decided to keep its distance, I can't say. But I'm grateful for every day that passes without incident. I've become something of a local celebrity, though that's not a term I'm comfortable with. People call me the monster hunter, but I don't hunt it. I watch, I warn, I protect as best I can. Casey has stood by me through it all. He's my partner in this strange new role I've taken on. Together, we patrol the borders of the town, maintain the security systems, and investigate any unusual occurrences in the woods. Mirabelle came back to town after college. We're not together. Too much has changed for that. But we're friends again. She's one of the few people who truly understands what I've been through, what I continue to go through. The story of Greenridge's monster has spread beyond our little town. We've had our share of monster hunters and thrill seekers come through, looking to catch a glimpse of the creature. Most leave disappointed. A few leave scared. None have seen what I've seen. There are nights when I wake up in a cold sweat, the memory of that night by the lake still vivid in my mind. The sound of Virgil's last cry still echoes in my nightmares, but I've learned to live with it. The scars on my side have faded, but they're still there. A constant reminder of what's at stake. I still love the woods. That's the strange thing. Despite everything, I still find peace among the trees. But it's a different kind of peace now. A watchful peace. A peace that knows it can be shattered at any moment. Some people have asked me why I stay. Why not leave Greenridge, leave the memories and the danger behind? But I can't. This is my home. These are my woods. And as long as that creature is out there, someone needs to stand guard. So I stay, I watch, I remember. And every now and then, when the wind blows just right through the trees, I could swear I hear Virgil's voice reminding me to stay vigilant, to respect the wild, and to always be prepared for the unexpected. That's my story. Believe it or not, it's the truth. It's a tale I'll carry with me for the rest of my days, a testament to the strange, the wild, and the inexplicable. So if you ever find yourself in Greenridge, take heed. The forest is a beautiful place, but it holds secrets that are best left undisturbed. And if you go into the woods, remember, you're not alone out there, not by a long shot. The sun was setting over Greenridge as I made my way through town, my backpack slung over one shoulder. The warm glow of twilight painted the familiar storefronts and houses in shades of gold and amber. I'd lived here my whole life, but lately, the place had started to feel suffocating. My breakup with Mirabelle still stung, a constant ache in my chest that I couldn't seem to shake. We'd been together since high school, and I'd always thought we'd grow old in this town together. But life had other plans, and now I found myself adrift, searching for something I couldn't quite name. As I passed the local diner, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window. I looked tired, my eyes carrying the weight of sleepless nights and unanswered questions. At 28, I should have had it all figured out by now. But instead, I felt more lost than ever. The forest loomed at the edge of town, a dark wall of pine and oak that stretched as far as the eye could see. It had always been my refuge, a place where I could lose myself in the quiet whisper of leaves and the soft crunch of earth beneath my feet. Tonight, it called to me stronger than ever. I made my way to the trailhead, pausing to take a deep breath of the crisp evening air. The scent of pine and damp earth filled my lungs, and for a moment I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. This was where I belonged. As I started down the familiar path, the sounds of town faded away, replaced by the gentle rustle of branches and the distant call of a whippoorwill. The last rays of sunlight filtered through the canopy, casting long shadows across the forest floor. I hiked for what felt like hours, losing myself in the rhythm of my footsteps and the steady beat of my heart. The sky darkened overhead, stars peeking out one by one through gaps in the leaves. I should have turned back, but something drove me onward, deeper into the heart of the woods. It wasn't until the moon rose full and bright that I realized how far I'd come. The trail had long since faded away, leaving me surrounded by ancient trees and the soft glow of moonlight. In the distance, I could make out the shimmer of water. Crystal Lake, a place I'd visited countless times before. As I approached the shore, a sense of unease settled over me. The night was too quiet, the usual chorus of frogs and insects conspicuously absent. Something felt off. I shrugged off the feeling, chalking it up to my overactive imagination. This was my home, after all. What was there to fear in these familiar woods? If only I'd known then what waited for me in the shadows. If only I'd turned back when I had the chance. But I didn't, and that decision would change my life forever. The surface of Crystal Lake was like glass, reflecting the moon and stars in perfect clarity. I stood at the water's edge, letting the peace of the moment wash over me. For the first time in weeks, my mind was quiet, free from the constant chatter of regret and self-doubt. I don't know how long I stood there, lost in thought, before I heard it. A twig snapping in the darkness behind me, followed by the rustle of something large moving through the underbrush. My heart rate quickened as I turned, peering into the gloom between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and uncertain in the vast silence of the forest. "Is someone there?" No response came, but the feeling of being watched intensified. I reached for my backpack, fumbling for the flashlight I always carried. As the beam cut through the darkness, I caught a glimpse of movement at the edge of the clearing. And then, out of the darkness stepped the strangest creature I'd ever seen. It was tall, at least 7 feet, covered in coarse, matted hair. Its limbs were long and sinewy, moving with a disturbing fluidity. It had a hunched back, and its hands, or were they claws, were huge, ending in sharp, curved talons. For a split second, I thought it was some sort of elaborate prank. Maybe the guys back in town had decided to scare the city slicker out of me. But then it moved, and the way it moved, there was nothing human about it. I froze, my mind racing. Fight or flight. But where could I run? The creature was between me and the trail back to town. My heart pounded in my chest as it let out a low, rumbling sound, almost like a growl, but more guttural, more primal. It advanced slowly, and I realized with a sickening clarity that this was no prank. This was real, and I was in serious danger. I fumbled for the small hunting knife on my belt, a pitifully small defense against this monstrous thing. "Stay back," I shouted, hoping to scare it off. It didn't even flinch. Instead, it tilted its head as if considering me, evaluating. Then, with terrifying speed, it lunged. I barely had time to react. I slashed out with my knife, managing to nick its arm, but it was like cutting through leather. The creature let out a shriek, more of anger than pain, and swiped at me with one of its claws. I felt a sharp pain in my side and stumbled back, warm blood seeping through my shirt. Adrenaline kicked in, and I scrambled to my feet, running towards the lake. Maybe I could swim across or find a hiding spot among the rocks on the far side. But the creature was fast, unnaturally so. It caught up to me within seconds, knocking me to the ground. I kicked out, connecting with its leg, and for a moment it backed off. I took the chance to scramble up, clutching my side where its claws had raked me. The pain was intense, but I couldn't stop. I stumbled towards the water, hearing the creature's heavy footsteps behind me. Just as I reached the edge of the lake, it caught me again, this time slamming me into the ground. The impact knocked the wind out of me, and I gasped for air, struggling to stay conscious. This was it, I thought. This is how I die. Suddenly, a deafening bang echoed through the clearing. The creature screeched and recoiled, looking around wildly. I managed to turn my head and saw a figure standing at the edge of the clearing, holding a shotgun. "Get away from him!" the figure shouted, firing another shot. The creature snarled but retreated into the forest, disappearing into the darkness. I lay there, gasping as the figure approached. It was an old man, his face lined with age and weathered by years in the wilderness. "Hang in there, son," he said, kneeling beside me. "We need to get you to a doctor." He helped me to my feet, supporting my weight as we made our way back to his cabin. The pain in my side was excruciating, but the old man moved quickly, guiding me through the dark forest with the ease of someone who knew every root and stone. As we stumbled through the night, I couldn't shake the image of the creature from my mind. What was it? Where had it come from? And most importantly, would it come back? Little did I know, this was only the beginning of a nightmare that would change everything I thought I knew about the world and myself. The old man's cabin was a short distance from the lake, a weathered structure that seemed to have grown organically from the forest floor. As we approached, I could see warm light spilling from the windows, a beacon of safety in the oppressive darkness of the woods. Once inside, the old man eased me into a chair by the fireplace. The cabin was cluttered but cozy, filled with an eclectic mix of hunting trophies, old books, and what looked like scientific equipment. "Name's Virgil," he said, rummaging through a cabinet. "Been living out here for decades. Seen that thing a few times, but never this close." "What is it?" I managed to ask, my voice weak. Virgil shook his head. "Don't rightly know. Some folks say it's a Bigfoot. Others think it's some kind of mutant bear. All I know is it's dangerous." He returned with a first aid kit and a bottle of strong-smelling liquid. "This might sting a bit," he warned, before cleaning and bandaging my wounds. The pain was intense, but it helped clear my head. As Virgil worked, I took in more details of the cabin. Maps covered one wall, marked with red pins and scribbled notes. A large bookshelf sagged under the weight of volumes on cryptozoology, folklore, and what looked like scientific journals. "You've been studying it," I said. It wasn't a question. Virgil's eyes met mine, sharp and assessing. "You're observant. Good. You'll need that if you want to survive around here." He finished bandaging my wounds and poured 2 glasses of the strong-smelling liquid. "Drink," he instructed. "It'll help with the pain." I took a sip and nearly choked. It burned going down, but almost immediately, I felt a warm numbness spreading through my body. "What do you mean, survive around here?" I asked. "Has it attacked others?" Virgil settled into a chair across from me, his face grave. "People go missing in these woods, have for years. Most folks write it off as accidents or blame it on wild animals, but I know better." He gestured to the maps on the wall. "I've been tracking the disappearances, trying to find a pattern. There's something out there, something that doesn't want to be found." I leaned forward, wincing at the pain in my side. "But why? Why haven't you told anyone?" Virgil let out a bitter laugh. "You think I haven't tried? Nobody believes an old hermit. They think I'm crazy seeing things that aren't there. But you've seen it now. You know the truth." He stood, moving to the window and peering out into the darkness. "Whatever that thing is, it's not natural, and it's not alone." A chill ran down my spine. "What do you mean, not alone?" Virgil turned back to me, his eyes haunted. "I've seen others, different shapes, different sizes. Always at night, always on the fringes of the forest. Something's happening out there, something big." I sat in stunned silence, trying to process what I was hearing. It was too much, too unbelievable. And yet the memory of the creature's otherworldly movement, its inhuman strength, was fresh in my mind. "What can we do?" I asked. Virgil's expression hardened. "We fight, we learn, and we stay alive long enough to figure out what the hell is going on in these woods." As the night wore on, Virgil shared more of what he knew or thought he knew. Theories about government experiments gone wrong, ancient creatures awakening from long slumber, doorways to other dimensions. It all sounded like science fiction, but after what I'd seen, I couldn't dismiss any of it outright. Eventually, exhaustion overtook me and I drifted into a fitful sleep. My dreams were filled with shadowy figures and glowing eyes, always just out of sight, always watching. When I woke the next morning, sunlight was streaming through the cabin windows. For a moment I thought it had all been a terrible nightmare, but the pain in my side and the unfamiliar surroundings quickly dispelled that hope. Virgil was already up, poring over his maps and notebooks. He looked up as I stirred, his eyes tired but alert. "How are you feeling?" he asked. "Like I got hit by a truck," I groaned, sitting up slowly. "But alive, thanks to you," Virgil nodded. "Good, because we've got work to do, if you're up for it, that is." I met his gaze, feeling a mix of fear and determination. Whatever was out there in the woods, whatever secrets were hiding in the shadows, I knew I couldn't walk away now. I was part of this, for better or worse. "I'm in," I said. "Where do we start?" Virgil's lips curved into a grim smile. "We start by getting you back to town. You need proper medical attention, and we need supplies. But mark my words, son, this is just the beginning. The real fight is yet to come." As we prepared to leave the safety of the cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing on the precipice of something much larger and more terrifying than I could possibly imagine. The forest that had once been my sanctuary now felt alien and threatening, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never look at these woods or the world the same way again. The journey back to town was a blur of pain and paranoia. Every snapping twig, every rustle of leaves sent a jolt of fear through my body. Virgil moved with surprising agility for his age, guiding us along hidden paths and game trails I'd never noticed before. As we neared the edge of the forest, the familiar sounds of civilization began to filter through the trees: distant car engines, the bark of a dog, the faint murmur of voices. It should have been comforting, but instead it felt surreal. How could life be going on as normal when there were monsters lurking in the woods? We emerged from the tree line near the outskirts of Greenridge. The sight of paved roads and neat houses was jarring after the primal terror of the night before. A few early risers were out and about, giving us curious looks as we made our way towards the center of town. "The clinic's just up ahead," I said, gritting my teeth against the pain in my side. The adrenaline had long since worn off, leaving me feeling weak and shaky. Virgil nodded, his eyes constantly scanning our surroundings. "I'll get you there, then I need to head back. Can't leave the cabin unattended for too long." I wanted to protest, to beg him not to leave me alone with this terrifying knowledge, but I understood. He had his post to keep, his vigil to maintain. The small medical clinic was just opening as we arrived. The nurse at the front desk took one look at my blood-stained shirt and pale face and immediately ushered us into an examination room. "What happened?" she asked, her voice a mix of concern and suspicion. I opened my mouth, then hesitated. What could I possibly say that wouldn't sound completely insane? "Hiking accident," Virgil interjected smoothly. "Fell down a ravine. Lucky I found him when I did." The nurse didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded and went to fetch the doctor. As soon as she was gone, Virgil leaned in close. "Listen carefully," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Don't tell them what really happened. They won't believe you, and it'll only cause problems. Stick to the hiking accident story. I'll be back to check on you in a few days. Until then, stay alert and stay safe." Before I could respond, he was gone, slipping out of the clinic as silently as a shadow. I was alone. The next few hours passed in a haze of examinations, stitches, and antibiotics. The doctor seemed skeptical of my story but didn't press too hard. I was diagnosed with a mild concussion, several deep lacerations, and a couple of bruised ribs. Nothing life-threatening, but enough to keep me in pain and off my feet for a while. As I lay in the hospital bed waiting to be discharged, my mind raced. What was I supposed to do now? Go back to my normal life, pretending I hadn't seen something impossible? How could I walk down the street, go to work, interact with people, all while carrying this secret? My phone, miraculously undamaged in the attack, buzzed with messages and missed calls. Friends wondering where I'd disappeared to, my boss asking if I was coming in for my shift at the hardware store. The mundane concerns of everyday life felt absurd in the face of what I'd experienced. Finally, late in the afternoon, I was released with a prescription for painkillers and strict instructions to take it easy for the next few weeks. I stepped out of the clinic into the warm sunlight, feeling like a stranger in my own town. As I made my way home, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat, every unfamiliar face a potential danger. The forest loomed at the edge of town, no longer a comforting presence, but a dark reminder of what waited in its depths. I reached my small apartment and locked the door behind me, leaning against it with a sigh of relief. But even here, in the familiar confines of my home, I didn't feel safe. I found myself checking and rechecking the locks, pulling the curtains closed, jumping at every creak and groan of the old building. As night fell, I sat in the darkness of my living room, staring out the window at the distant tree line. Sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually won out. My dreams were a chaotic mix of glowing eyes, razor-sharp claws, and Virgil's weathered face, all swirling together in a nightmarish tableau. The next few days passed in a haze of pain medication and restless sleep. I called in sick to work, using my injuries as an excuse. My friends tried to visit, but I turned them away, not ready to face their questions or concern. How could I possibly explain what had happened? It was on the third day that I heard a knock at my door. Cautiously I approached, peering through the peephole. Virgil stood in the hallway, looking out of place in his worn flannel shirt and muddy boots. I opened the door, ushering him inside quickly. "Any sign of it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Virgil shook his head. "Nothing definitive, but there have been reports of strange noises in the woods, animals acting skittish. Something's got them spooked." He settled into a chair, his eyes taking in the state of my apartment, dishes piled in the sink, takeout containers littering the coffee table. "How are you holding up?" I sank onto the couch, wincing at the pull of stitches. "Honestly, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing. And when I'm awake, I can't stop thinking about what else might be out there." Virgil nodded, his expression grim. "That's normal. The first encounter is always the hardest. But you can't let it consume you. We need you sharp, focused." "We?" I asked. "What exactly are you planning?" He leaned forward, his voice low and intense. "I've been tracking these creatures for years, but I'm just one man. With your help, we might finally be able to uncover the truth, to stop whatever's happening in those woods." Part of me wanted to refuse, to tell him to leave and never come back, to try and forget everything I'd seen and return to my normal life. But I knew that was impossible. I was in this now, whether I liked it or not. "What do you need me to do?" I asked. Virgil's eyes gleamed with a mix of excitement and determination. "First, you need to heal, get your strength back. Then we start digging. There's a history to these woods, to this town, secrets buried deep. We need to uncover them if we're going to have any chance of understanding what we're up against." He reached into his bag and pulled out a thick, leather-bound journal. "This is everything I've collected over the years, sightings, theories, historical accounts. Study it, learn it. Your life may depend on it." As Virgil left, I felt a strange mix of fear and anticipation. The journal sat on my coffee table, a Pandora's box of terrifying possibilities. With a deep breath, I opened it and began to read. The next few weeks were a deep dive into a world I never knew existed. Virgil's journal was a goldmine of information, each page revealing new horrors and mysteries. There were accounts of similar creatures dating back centuries, not just in our area, but all over the world. Newspaper clippings of unexplained disappearances, blurry photographs of strange shapes in the forest, and detailed maps marking sighting locations and possible nesting grounds. As my body healed, my mind raced with possibilities. I started connecting dots, seeing patterns where before there had only been random incidents. The more I learned, the more I realized how little we truly knew. I returned to work, but my heart wasn't in it. Every spare moment was spent researching, cross-referencing Virgil's notes with historical records and scientific journals. My apartment became a war room, walls covered in maps and timelines, strings connecting seemingly unrelated events. My friends noticed the change in me. They commented on my distraction, the dark circles under my eyes. I brushed off their concerns, making excuses about a new project I was working on. It wasn't entirely a lie. One evening, as I was poring over an old town map, my phone rang. It was Virgil. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tense. "Meet me at the cabin, tonight." I didn't hesitate. Within an hour, I was hiking through the darkening woods, my backpack loaded with supplies and my new hunting knife strapped to my belt. The forest no longer felt like home, every shadow concealing potential danger. Virgil was waiting on the porch of his cabin, a rifle cradled in his arms. "Glad you made it," he said, ushering me inside. "We've got a situation." He spread a map on the table, pointing to a spot deep in the forest. "There's been another sighting. A group of hikers saw something moving in the trees. Described it as like a man, but not a man. Sound familiar?" I nodded, my mouth dry. "What are we going to do?" Virgil's eyes met mine, hard and determined. "We're going hunting." We set out at dawn, our backpacks heavy with supplies and weapons. Virgil moved with the quiet confidence of a man who knew these woods like the back of his hand. I followed, every sense on high alert, jumping at every snapping twig and rustling leaf. As we ventured deeper into the forest, the air seemed to thicken. The usual sounds of birds and small animals faded away, replaced by an oppressive silence. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. "We're getting close," Virgil whispered, gesturing to some marks on a nearby tree. Claw marks, fresh and deep, scored the bark at a height that made my blood run cold. We pressed on, following a trail that only Virgil could see. The trees grew denser, older, their gnarled branches twisting overhead like arthritic fingers. Shadows deepened, and I found myself straining to see more than a few feet ahead. Suddenly Virgil held up a hand, freezing in place. I followed suit, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would give us away. Then I heard it, a low, rumbling growl that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Get ready," Virgil breathed, raising his rifle. The attack came from above. A dark shape dropped from the canopy, landing between us with a thud that shook the ground. It was similar to the creature I'd encountered by the lake, but larger, its matted fur streaked with gray. Virgil fired, the shot deafening in the enclosed space. The creature roared, more in anger than pain, and lunged at him. I watched in horror as it knocked the rifle from his hands, sending him sprawling. Without thinking, I charged, my knife held high. The creature turned, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was terrifyingly unanimal. For a moment we faced each other, human and monster, neither moving. Then it spoke. The sound was guttural, barely recognizable as language, but unmistakably words. "Leave," it growled. "This not your place." I stumbled back, my mind reeling. It could talk, it could think. This changed everything. Before I could respond, a shot rang out. Virgil had regained his rifle. The creature howled, clutching its shoulder, then turned and vanished into the underbrush with impossible speed. We stood there, panting, trying to process what had just happened. Virgil's face was pale, his hands shaking as he lowered the rifle. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Virgil nodded slowly. "I've suspected for years, but to actually hear it." We made our way back to the cabin in silence, both lost in our own thoughts. The encounter had raised more questions than it answered, opening up a world of terrifying possibilities. As we reached the safety of the cabin, Virgil turned to me, his eyes haunted. "You understand now, don't you? This is bigger than just a few creatures in the woods. There's something else going on here, something beyond our understanding." I nodded, the weight of this new knowledge settling heavily on my shoulders. "So what do we do now?" Virgil's expression hardened with determination. "We keep digging, we find answers, and we prepare for whatever comes next." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of research and preparation. We pored over historical records, scientific journals, and ancient legends, searching for any clue that might help us understand what we were dealing with. Slowly, a picture began to emerge. The creatures weren't new to these woods. They'd been here for centuries, perhaps even millennia. Native American legends spoke of the Old Ones, beings that walked between worlds. Early settler accounts described encounters with wild men that could disappear into thin air. But it was a set of classified government documents, obtained through one of Virgil's shadowy contacts, that finally gave us the answers we sought. In the 1950s, a secret research facility had been established deep in the forest, tasked with studying what they called anomalous biological entities. The scientists had made contact with the creatures, learning that they were not just animals, but an ancient, intelligent species that had lived alongside humans for thousands of years. They possessed abilities we could barely comprehend, the power to manipulate energy fields, to move between dimensions, to communicate across vast distances with their minds. But the research had gone wrong. In their eagerness to understand and control these beings, the scientists had pushed too far. There had been deaths, cover-ups, and eventually the abandonment of the facility. The creatures, once content to live in peaceful isolation, had been angered by the intrusion. They saw humans as a threat, one that needed to be eliminated or driven away. As we pieced together this horrifying truth, reports of sightings and unexplained phenomena increased. It was as if our investigation had stirred up a hornet's nest. The creatures were becoming bolder, venturing closer to town, leaving signs of their presence that even the most skeptical couldn't ignore. We knew we had to act, but what could two men do against an ancient, powerful species? The answer came from an unexpected source. One night, as we sat in Virgil's cabin discussing our next move, there was a knock at the door. Standing on the porch was a woman I'd never seen before, her silver hair gleaming in the moonlight. "My name is Elena," she said, her eyes sharp and knowing, and I believe we have a common enemy. Elena, it turned out, was part of a secret society that had been monitoring the creatures for generations. They had members all over the world, each tasked with keeping the balance between our world and theirs. The incident at the research facility upset a delicate equilibrium, she explained. We've been trying to restore it ever since, but the situation has reached a critical point. If we don't act soon, the consequences could be catastrophic. With Elena's help, we formulated a plan. We would attempt to communicate with the creatures to negotiate a new peace, and if that failed, well, the society had ways of dealing with threats that went beyond conventional weapons. As we prepared for our mission, I couldn't help but reflect on how much my life had changed. Just months ago, I had been a simple small-town guy, nursing a broken heart and wondering what to do with my life. Now, I stood on the precipice of a conflict that could determine the fate of two species. The forest that had once been my sanctuary now loomed before us, dark and foreboding, but as I looked at Virgil and Elena, I felt a surge of determination. Whatever waited for us in those woods, whatever challenges we would face, I knew one thing for certain: nothing would ever be the same again. As we stepped into the shadows of the trees, ready to face the unknown, I realized that this was just the beginning of a much larger story, one that would test not just our courage and resourcefulness, but our very understanding of the world and our place in it. The creatures were out there, waiting, and we were ready to meet them. The city had become a prison. Concrete walls and glass towers loomed over me, trapping me in a maze of endless routines and meaningless tasks. Every day, the same faces, the same conversations, the same soul-crushing monotony. I was suffocating, drowning in a sea of mediocrity and unfulfilled dreams. That's why I decided to escape. My name is Rowan Thorne, and I've always found solace in the wilderness. The quiet whisper of leaves, the gentle gurgle of streams, the earthy scent of damp soil, these were the things that made me feel alive. So when the weight of urban life became too much to bear, I knew exactly where to go. I packed up my RV, a sturdy old beast I'd lovingly restored over the years. It wasn't much, but it was my ticket to freedom. I stocked it with all the essentials: canned food, bottled water, a portable grill, and my trusty shotgun. The last item wasn't just for show. I'd heard stories about black bears in the Ouachita National Forest, my chosen destination. Better safe than sorry, I figured. As I pulled out of my driveway, leaving behind the cramped apartment I'd called home for the past 5 years, a weight lifted from my shoulders. The open road stretched before me, promising adventure and a much-needed respite from the daily grind. The drive to Arkansas was long but therapeutic. With each mile that passed, I felt the tension in my body easing. By the time I reached the outskirts of the Ouachita National Forest, I was already feeling more like myself than I had in months. I found a secluded campsite, far from the usual tourist spots. It was perfect, a small clearing surrounded by towering pines with a babbling brook nearby. As I parked my RV and began setting up camp, I couldn't help but smile. This was exactly what I needed. The first few hours were bliss. I set up my portable grill and cooked some burgers, savoring the taste of food prepared in the open air. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows through the dense canopy of trees, I sat in a folding chair, nursing a cold beer and listening to the forest come alive with nocturnal sounds. This was supposed to be my chance to recharge, to reconnect with myself and nature. I had no idea that this peaceful retreat was about to turn into a nightmare that would haunt me for the rest of my life. As darkness fell, I decided to turn in for the night. I was just about to step into my RV when I heard it, a distant, chilling scream that cut through the stillness of the forest like a knife. My blood ran cold. It was faint but unmistakable. A cry for help. My heart pounded in my chest as I stood frozen, straining my ears. For a moment, all I could hear was the usual nighttime chorus of crickets and distant owl hoots. Had I imagined it? Then it came again, louder this time, more desperate. A human voice filled with terror and pain. I hesitated for a split second. Every instinct told me to lock myself in the RV and wait for morning. But I couldn't just ignore someone in distress. What if they were hurt, lost? What if they died because I was too afraid to help? With shaking hands, I grabbed my flashlight and shotgun. The weight of the weapon was reassuring in my grip as I stepped away from the safety of my campsite and into the oppressive darkness of the forest. The beam of my flashlight seemed pitifully small against the vast blackness that surrounded me. Trees loomed on all sides, their branches reaching out like gnarled fingers, ready to snatch me up. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig under my feet, sent a jolt of adrenaline through my system. I called out, my voice sounding thin and scared in the night air. "Hello, is anyone there? Do you need help?" No response came, save for the echo of my own words bouncing back at me from the depths of the forest. I pressed on, moving deeper into the woods, away from the relative safety of my campsite. The further I went, the more oppressive the darkness became. The trees seemed to close in around me, their branches casting eerie, shifting shadows in the beam of my flashlight. More than once I thought I saw movement out of the corner of my eye, only to swing my light around and find nothing but more trees and undergrowth. Time seemed to lose all meaning as I stumbled through the forest. Had I been walking for minutes or hours? I couldn't tell. My nerves were frayed, every sense on high alert. The weight of the shotgun in my hands was no longer comforting. Instead, it felt like a grim reminder of the danger I might be walking into. Just as I was about to give up and try to find my way back to camp, I heard it again. A scream, so close it made me jump. It was coming from just ahead, beyond a thick cluster of trees. Hard in my throat, I pushed through the underbrush, branches scratching at my face and arms. I burst into a small clearing, and what I saw there made my blood run cold. A man lay on the ground, his body twisted in an unnatural position. Even in the dim light of my flashlight, I could see he was covered in blood. His eyes were wide open, filled with an expression of utter terror. I rushed to his side, but it was immediately clear that I was too late. His throat had been slashed, the wound gaping and horrible. Deep cuts covered his torso, the flesh torn and mangled. This wasn't an animal attack. The cuts were too precise, too deliberate. Someone had done this. As the realization sank in, a new kind of fear gripped me. Whoever had done this might still be nearby. I stood up quickly, my flashlight beam darting around the clearing as I tried to peer into the surrounding darkness. That's when I saw him. At the edge of the clearing stood a tall, muscular man. He was unnaturally still, like a statue carved from the darkness itself. In his hand he held a large hunting knife, its blade glinting wickedly in the moonlight. But it was his face that truly terrified me, or rather the lack of expression on it. His eyes were cold and calculating, devoid of any emotion as they locked onto me. I raised my shotgun, trying to keep my hands from shaking. "Who are you?" I demanded, my voice cracking with fear. The man didn't respond. Instead, he started walking towards me, his movements fluid and purposeful, the knife raised and ready. In that moment, I realized I had stumbled into something far more terrifying than anything I could have imagined. My peaceful retreat had turned into a waking nightmare, and I was face to face with a killer. Time seemed to slow down as the man advanced towards me. My mind raced, trying to process what was happening. This couldn't be real. Things like this didn't happen in real life, did they? But the corpse on the ground and the very real, very dangerous man approaching me said otherwise. I took a step back, my fingers tightening on the shotgun. "Stop right there," I yelled, trying to inject some authority into my voice, but it came out as more of a terrified plea. He didn't stop. If anything, his pace quickened, eating up the distance between us with long, purposeful strides. The knife in his hand gleamed, and I could almost feel its sharp edge against my skin. Fight or flight. Those were my options, and I had precious little time to decide. My legs trembled, urging me to turn and run, to flee back into the forest and hope I could lose him in the darkness. But a cold, rational part of my brain knew that was suicide. He knew these woods, and I was hopelessly lost. He'd run me down like a dog. That left only one option. I raised the shotgun, aiming it squarely at his chest. "I said stop!" I screamed, my voice echoing through the clearing. He was close now, close enough that I could see the anticipation in his eyes, the slight curl of his lips. He thought I was prey, easy pickings. He didn't think I had it in me to pull the trigger. He was wrong. The blast of the shotgun was deafening in the quiet of the forest. The kickback slammed into my shoulder, nearly knocking me off my feet. For a moment, all I could hear was a high-pitched ringing in my ears. Time seemed to stand still as I watched the man stagger backwards, clutching his shoulder. Blood seeped between his fingers, dark and glistening in the moonlight. A wave of relief washed over me. I'd done it. I'd stopped him. But to my horror, he didn't go down. He stumbled for a moment, then straightened up. His eyes, previously cold and emotionless, now burned with rage. He started towards me again, his movements jerky but determined. Panic seized me. How was he still standing? I'd hit him square in the shoulder. He should be on the ground. Instead, he was coming at me with renewed fury, the knife still clutched in his hand. I didn't hesitate this time. I fired again, aiming for his chest. The second shot knocked him off his feet, and he fell to the ground with a heavy thud. For several long moments I stood there, the smoking shotgun still raised, my ears ringing from the repeated blasts. The man lay motionless on the forest floor, a dark stain spreading across his chest. I'd killed him. The thought hit me like a physical blow, nearly driving me to my knees. I'd taken a human life. Self-defense or not, the weight of that act settled over me like a shroud. But I had no time to process it. A rustle in the bushes nearby snapped me back to reality. Low voices drifted through the trees, getting closer. More people were coming. Panic gripped me anew. Were they more killers? Friends of the man I'd just shot? I couldn't take that chance. I had to get out of there. I turned and ran, not daring to look back. The forest that had seemed so peaceful earlier now felt oppressive and threatening. Every shadow concealed potential danger. Every sound was a pursuer closing in. Branches whipped at my face as I crashed through the underbrush, my lungs burning as I gulped in the cool night air. I had no idea if I was going in the right direction, but I didn't care. All that mattered was putting as much distance as possible between myself and that clearing. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, I burst out of the tree line and saw my RV. I'd never been so happy to see anything in my life. I scrambled inside, locking the doors behind me. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, but finally the engine roared to life. As I sped away from the campsite, my headlights cutting through the darkness, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Eyes in the forest, following my retreat. I drove through the night, not stopping until I reached a small town several miles away. I parked in a well-lit area, my hands still trembling on the steering wheel. What had I stumbled into? Who were those people in the forest, and why had they killed that man? I needed answers, but I was too shaken to think clearly. One thing was certain, my peaceful retreat had turned into a nightmare, and I had a sinking feeling it was far from over. I couldn't bring myself to drive any further. The adrenaline that had fueled my escape was wearing off, leaving me feeling drained and shaky. I needed rest, but the thought of closing my eyes, of being vulnerable, sent a chill down my spine. I spotted a rundown motel at the edge of town, its neon sign flickering weakly in the pre-dawn gloom. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. I parked my RV and checked into a dingy room, my nerves jangling at every creak of the floorboards and rattle of the ancient air conditioning unit. Once inside, I double-locked the door and wedged a chair under the handle for good measure. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the bed, my body finally giving in to exhaustion. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the dead man's face, his eyes wide with terror. I saw the killer advancing towards me, his knife glinting in the moonlight. I heard the blast of my shotgun, felt the recoil, saw the man fall. I jolted awake, drenched in cold sweat. Pale morning light was seeping through the threadbare curtains. I'd managed to doze off, but my dreams had been filled with blood and shadows. As I sat there, trying to calm my racing heart, the events of the previous night replayed in my mind. It all seemed so surreal, like a horror movie come to life. But the ache in my shoulder from the shotgun's kickback and the scratches on my arms from crashing through the underbrush were very real reminders that it had all actually happened. I needed answers. Who was the dead man? Who had killed him and why? And who were the others I'd heard coming through the forest? The more I thought about it, the more convinced I became that I had stumbled onto something big, something dangerous. But I couldn't go to the police, not yet. I had no proof of what had happened, and I had killed a man. Self-defense or not, that would raise a lot of questions I wasn't prepared to answer. No, I needed to figure this out on my own first. I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I involved anyone else. With shaking hands, I pulled out my laptop and connected to the motel's spotty Wi-Fi. I started searching for any news about missing persons or mysterious deaths in the Ouachita National Forest area. At first, I found nothing out of the ordinary. A few stories about hikers getting lost and being rescued, warnings about bear activity, that sort of thing. But as I dug deeper, going back further in time, a pattern began to emerge. Over the past several years, there had been a string of disappearances in and around the forest. Hikers, campers, even a few locals, all vanishing without a trace. The cases were spread out, sometimes months apart, and most had been written off as accidents or animal attacks. But looking at them all together, it was clear something more sinister was at play. My blood ran cold as I realized the implications. Had I stumbled upon the hunting grounds of a serial killer? Was the man in the forest one of his victims? And if so, how many others had there been? The more I uncovered, the more convinced I became that I was onto something big. But I couldn't do this alone. I needed help, someone with resources and skills I didn't have. That's when I remembered a name I'd come across in my research, Eliza Donovan. She was a local journalist known for her investigative work. She had written a few pieces about the disappearances, hinting at connections that the authorities seemed to be ignoring. If anyone could help me uncover the truth, it was her. With trembling fingers, I found her contact information and composed an email. I kept it vague, just enough to pique her interest without revealing too much. I couldn't risk putting everything in writing, not when I didn't know who might be watching. As I hit send, a mix of relief and apprehension washed over me. I was no longer alone in this, but I had also taken a step down a path from which there might be no return. Whatever was going on in those woods, whatever dark secrets lay hidden among the trees, I was now committed to uncovering the truth, no matter the cost. The reply from Eliza Donovan came faster than I expected. Her message was brief, but it sent a jolt of both excitement and fear through me. Meet me at the Rusty Nail Diner, 2 p.m. Come alone. I spent the next few hours in a state of anxious anticipation. Part of me wanted to flee, to put as much distance between myself and this town as possible. But a stronger part knew I couldn't walk away. Not now. Not after what I'd seen. The Rusty Nail was a greasy spoon on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where the coffee is always burnt and the vinyl booths have seen better days. As I pushed open the door, the bell above it jangling discordantly, I scanned the sparse crowd. Eliza wasn't hard to spot. She sat in a corner booth, a laptop open in front of her, a half-empty cup of coffee at her elbow. She looked up as I approached, her sharp eyes taking my measure. "Rowan Thorne?" she asked, her voice low. I nodded, sliding into the booth across from her. "Thanks for meeting me." She closed her laptop with a snap. "Your email was intriguing, Mr. Thorne, but I need more than vague hints. What exactly did you see in those woods?" For a moment, I hesitated. Once I told her there would be no going back, but I had come too far to turn back now. Taking a deep breath, I began to recount the events of that night in the forest. As I spoke, Eliza's expression shifted from skepticism to intense focus. She asked sharp, probing questions, pushing me for details I hadn't even realized I'd noticed. By the time I finished, her eyes were gleaming with a mix of excitement and concern. "This is big, Rowan," she said, leaning forward. "Bigger than you realize. Those disappearances you found, I've been tracking them for years, but this is the first real lead I've had." She pulled out a map, spreading it across the table. "The attacks have been concentrated in this area," she said, circling a section of the forest. "But the authorities have been reluctant to connect the dots. They say it's just coincidence or animal attacks, but we both know that's not true." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So what do we do now?" Eliza's eyes met mine, her gaze steely with determination. "We dig deeper. We find out who's behind this, and we expose them. But Rowan, you need to understand. This is dangerous. These people, whoever they are, they've been operating unchecked for years. They won't take kindly to us poking around." I nodded. a mixture of fear and resolve settling in my gut. I understand, but I can't walk away from this. Not now. Good, Eliza said, a grim smile on her face, because we're going to need each other to see this through. Over the next few weeks, Eliza and I worked tirelessly to uncover the truth. We pored over police reports, interviewed locals, and followed every lead, no matter how small. Slowly, a pattern began to emerge, one more horrifying than I could have imagined. Our investigation led us down a dark path, revealing a truth more terrifying than either of us had anticipated. The disappearances weren't random acts of violence or the work of a lone serial killer. They were part of something much more organized and sinister. We uncovered evidence of a group that called themselves the Hunters. They were wealthy thrill-seekers who had turned the Ouachita National Forest into their personal hunting ground. But they weren't hunting animals, they were hunting people. It was a twisted game for them. They would lure unsuspecting victims into the forest, sometimes by staging fake emergencies, other times by simply waiting for hikers or campers to stumble into their territory. Then the hunt would begin. The more we dug, the more horrifying details we uncovered. The Hunters had been operating for years, their activities covered up by corrupt local officials who were either on their payroll or too scared to act. "This is bigger than we thought," Eliza said one night as we pored over our gathered evidence. "These people, they're powerful, connected. They've got money and influence to keep this quiet." I nodded grimly, the weight of our discovery settling heavily on my shoulders. "So what do? We can't let this continue." Eliza's eyes gleamed with determination. "We expose them. We gather every shred of evidence we can and we blow this wide open. But Rowan," she added, her voice softening slightly, "you need to understand the risk. Once we do this, there's no going back. These people will come after us with everything they've got." I thought about the man I'd seen in the forest, his cold eyes and bloody knife. I thought about all the innocent lives lost to this sick game. "I understand," I said firmly, "but we have to do this. We might be the only ones who can stop them." Eliza nodded, a grim smile on her face. "All right then, let's bring these bastards down." We worked tirelessly, gathering evidence, connecting dots, and building a case that would be impossible to ignore. We interviewed survivors who had managed to escape the hunts, pieced together financial records that showed the flow of hush money, and even managed to obtain photographic evidence of the Hunters in action. As our investigation progressed, the danger around us grew. We started noticing cars following us, felt eyes watching us wherever we went. One night Eliza's apartment was broken into, our files ransacked. It was a clear message: back off or else. But we didn't back off. If anything, it only strengthened our resolve. We were close, so close to bringing the whole operation crashing down. Finally, after weeks of work, we had enough. Eliza prepared a series of explosive articles, laying out the entire operation in horrifying detail. I provided my eyewitness account, filling in the gaps and providing a human face to the story. The night before the first article was set to be published, Eliza and I sat in her office, the weight of what we were about to do hanging heavy in the air. "Are you ready for this?" she asked, her finger hovering over the send button that would deliver the article to her editor. I took a deep breath, thinking about how my life had changed since that night in the forest. There was no going back now. "Do it," I said. With a click, the article was sent. Our fight against the Hunters had entered its final, most dangerous phase. The response to Eliza's articles was immediate and overwhelming. The first piece hit like a bombshell, sending shockwaves through the community and beyond. As subsequent articles were released, each more damning than the last, the story exploded into a national scandal. Law enforcement agencies that had previously turned a blind eye were now forced into action. The FBI descended on the town, launching a full-scale investigation. Arrests were made, corrupt officials were ousted, and the Hunters found their carefully constructed world crumbling around them. But amidst the chaos and the victory, a growing sense of unease settled over me. The leader of the Hunters, the man I had encountered and shot in the forest, was still at large. He had vanished without a trace, and the thought of him being out there, possibly plotting revenge, haunted my every waking moment. Eliza and I were hailed as heroes by some, but we also faced backlash. Death threats poured in, and we had to be constantly vigilant. The police provided protection, but it did little to ease the constant fear that gripped me. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Eliza said one evening as we sat in her fortified apartment, going over the latest developments in the case. "But we did the right thing, Rowan. We've saved lives." I nodded, trying to take comfort in her words. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. That somewhere out there, the man from the forest was waiting, planning his revenge. As the weeks passed, the initial furor began to die down. Trials were scheduled, plea deals were made, and slowly justice was being served. But for me, there was no relief. Every shadow held a potential threat. Every unexpected sound made me jump. I tried to return to some semblance of normal life, but I knew that was impossible. I was forever changed by what I had experienced, what I had uncovered. Then one night, my worst fears were realized. I was in my RV, parked in a secure lot that had become my semi-permanent home. Sleep, as usual, was elusive, my mind racing with memories and fears. A sound outside made me sit up, my heart pounding. At first I told myself it was nothing, just the wind or a stray animal. But then I heard it again, a deliberate human sound. Someone was out there. With shaking hands, I reached for my shotgun, which I now kept always within reach. I moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. What I saw made my blood run cold. Standing there, bathed in the sickly glow of a distant streetlight, was the man from the forest. His shoulder was bandaged, but the cold, murderous look in his eyes was unmistakable. Our eyes met through the window, and a chilling smile spread across his face. He had found me. The final hunt was about to begin. Time seemed to stand still as I stared into the eyes of the man who had haunted my nightmares for weeks. He stood there, a dark silhouette against the night, his presence radiating menace. "You thought you could get away with it, didn't you?" he called out, his voice carrying easily through the thin walls of my RV. "Thought you could expose us and walk away?" I gripped my shotgun tighter, my palms sweaty against the cool metal. "I'm not afraid of you," I shouted back, trying to inject more confidence into my voice than I felt. He laughed, a chilling sound that sent shivers down my spine. "You should be." Without warning, he lunged forward. I barely had time to react before he slammed into the door of the RV, the whole vehicle shaking with the impact. The door groaned under his assault, the lock straining to hold. I knew it wouldn't last long. I had to act. Taking a deep breath, I threw open the door, bringing my shotgun up in one fluid motion, but he was faster than I expected. Before I could squeeze the trigger, he was on me, knocking the weapon from my grasp. We fell to the ground in a tangle of limbs, grappling desperately. His strength was incredible, fueled by rage and a twisted determination. I felt myself weakening under his assault, my vision blurring as his hands found my throat. In that moment, staring death in the face, a strange calm came over me. I had come too far, uncovered too much to let it end like this. With a surge of desperate strength, I managed to get my knee up between us and pushed, creating just enough space to break his grip. My hand scrabbled in the dirt, searching for anything I could use as a weapon. My fingers closed around a rock, and without hesitation, I swung it with all my might, connecting solidly with his temple. He staggered back, momentarily dazed. It was the opening I needed. I scrambled to my feet, lunging for the shotgun that lay just out of reach. My fingers had just closed around the weapon when I felt a searing pain in my side. I looked down to see his knife buried to the hilt between my ribs, his face a mask of triumph and hate. But it was too late for him. Even as pain exploded through my body, I brought the shotgun up and fired. The blast echoed through the night, and he fell backward, a look of surprise frozen on his face. I collapsed to my knees, the shotgun slipping from my grasp. The world around me began to blur, darkness creeping in at the edges of my vision. As I felt myself falling, my last coherent thought was that it was finally over. The nightmare had come to an end. When I next opened my eyes, I was greeted by the sterile white of a hospital room. Eliza was there, her face pale with worry but her eyes shining with relief. "You're going to be okay," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "It's over, Rowan. Really over this time." I nodded weakly, feeling the pull of stitches in my side. The events of the past weeks flashed through my mind. The terror in the forest, the grueling investigation, the final confrontation. We had exposed the hunters and brought them to justice, but it had come at a great cost. As I lay there recovering both physically and mentally, I knew that I would never be the same. The peace I had sought in the forest seemed like a distant dream now, but I had uncovered a terrible truth, had played a part in stopping a great evil, and perhaps in time I would find a different kind of peace in that knowledge. The nightmare was over, but its echoes would remain with me always, a reminder of the darkness that can lurk in the hearts of men and of the courage it takes to stand against it. As Eliza squeezed my hand, I managed a small smile. We had faced the darkness together, and we had survived. Whatever came next, I knew I wouldn't have to face it alone. I've been driving trucks for almost 15 years, crisscrossing the country with little more than the hum of the engine and the miles of asphalt under my wheels to keep me company. The job suits me fine, pays well enough, and gives me time to think without much interruption. Besides, there's something about the open road, the endless stretches of American landscape that gives me a sense of freedom. But some routes stick with you in ways you can't shake off. Last week, I picked up a load from a small manufacturing plant in a remote part of Alabama, the kind of place you only find if you're looking for it. They make some kind of specialized metal components. I didn't ask too many questions, just wanted to get loaded up and on my way. I had a delivery to make to a distribution center in New Mexico, a good 1,000 miles of driving ahead of me, with nothing but empty highways and a few lonely truck stops along the way. It started like any other run. Early morning, the sun barely up, the air thick with humidity. I grabbed a coffee from a rundown gas station near the plant, the kind where the clerk barely looks up when you hand over your cash. A quick glance at the map showed a couple of small towns on my route, but nothing worth stopping for. I figured I'd be through this part of the country by dusk. As I pulled out onto the highway, the familiar weight of the truck settling into the worn grooves of the road, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Maybe it was the way the plant manager had looked at me when I signed for the cargo, a flicker of something in his eyes. Or maybe it was just the weather, the heavy air promising a storm. Either way, I shrugged it off. I had a job to do, and I've never been one for superstition. The miles rolled by, the landscape shifting from the lush green of Alabama to the more arid terrain of Mississippi. I kept the radio low, half listening to a talk show about some new scientific discovery, something about metal alloys and their strange properties under extreme conditions. It was all over my head, but it helped pass the time. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, I started to notice something in my rearview mirror. A black sedan, sleek and expensive looking, out of place on this stretch of highway. At first, I didn't think much of it. You get used to seeing the same vehicles on these long stretches of road. But this one was different. It kept its distance, never trying to pass, just hanging back far enough that I could barely make out the driver. Little did I know this was just the beginning of a journey that would test the limits of my sanity and survival instincts. Somewhere around noon, I found myself in the middle of nowhere. No cell signal, no signs of life for miles. Just trees, fields, and the occasional deer darting across the road. It wasn't unusual for this part of the country. What was unusual was the black sedan that had been following me for the last 50 miles or so. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe they were heading to the same general area, or perhaps they felt safer following a big rig on these lonely roads. But as the hours ticked by and the car remained a constant presence in my mirror, a knot of unease began to form in my stomach. It wasn't until I hit a particularly desolate stretch of highway, where the trees closed in on both sides and the road dipped into a series of sharp turns, that I started to get really uneasy. The sedan had closed the gap, maybe 100 yards behind me now. I glanced in the mirror again, trying to get a better look. That's when I noticed the guy behind the wheel. He was a big man, broad shoulders, the kind you don't usually see crammed into a sedan. His face was hard to make out through the reflection, but there was something off about the way he sat there, hands gripping the wheel like he was waiting for something. I shook it off, figuring I was just tired, that the monotony of the road was getting to me. But then he started getting closer. I downshifted, trying to maintain control as the road twisted and turned, but the sedan kept pace. I could feel the tension in my neck, the tightness in my chest. Something was wrong. I knew it then. The guy wasn't just some random driver. He was following me, and he wasn't planning on passing. I considered pulling over, but there was no shoulder, just dense forest on either side. I knew if I stopped, I'd be trapped, and there was no way I was getting out of the truck to confront this guy. Not out here, not alone. As I rounded another curve, the sedan suddenly surged forward, closing the distance between us. My hands tightened on the wheel, knuckles white as I tried to think of what to do. The road ahead straightened out, and I pressed on the gas, trying to put some space between us. But the sedan kept coming, relentless, like it had all the time in the world. Then, just as suddenly, the road dipped into a steep decline and the trees cleared. Up ahead I saw a sign for a rest area, one of those tiny, barely maintained spots with a couple of picnic tables and a bathroom that hadn't been cleaned in years. It wasn't much, but it was the only place I could think of to stop without being completely isolated. I made a split-second decision and veered off the highway, tires screeching as I pulled into the rest area. The sedan followed, its engine roaring as it closed in. I braced myself, half expecting the guy to slam into the back of my rig, but he didn't. Instead, he pulled in beside me, the engine idling as he sat there staring. I locked the doors, my heart pounding as I tried to figure out my next move. The rest area was empty, not a soul in sight. I glanced at the sedan, the man still sitting there, his face hidden in the shadow of the car's interior. For a moment I thought about honking the horn, trying to scare him off, but something told me it wouldn't make a difference. Then, without warning, the man got out of the car. He was taller than I'd expected, easily 6'5", with a thick build that made him look even bigger. His clothes were nondescript, a dark jacket and jeans, but his face was what really set me on edge. It was hard, angular, with a square jaw and a nose that looked like it had been broken more than once. His skin was pale, almost sallow, and his mouth was set in a thin line. No expression, just cold, calculating eyes fixed on me. I fumbled for my phone, but there was still no signal. The guy started walking toward my truck, slow and deliberate, like he knew there was no rush. My mind raced, trying to think of what to do. The knife I kept in the glove compartment suddenly felt woefully inadequate against someone like him. Then he stopped, about 10 feet from my door, and just stood there staring up at me. I could feel the weight of his gaze, the sense that he was sizing me up, deciding whether or not to make his move. I reached for the knife, my hands shaking as I gripped the handle. I wasn't sure what I was going to do with it, but it was the only thing that made me feel even remotely safe. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it was over. The man turned and walked back to his car, got in, and drove off without so much as a glance back. I sat there, stunned, my heart still racing as I watched the taillights disappear down the highway. It didn't make sense. None of it made sense. Why follow me all that way just to leave without doing anything? I waited another 10 minutes, maybe more, before I finally felt like I could breathe again. The rest area was still empty, no sign of anyone else. I debated calling the cops, but without a signal, it wasn't like I could do much anyway. And what would I even tell them? That some guy followed me for miles, only to walk away without a word? As the adrenaline began to wear off, exhaustion set in. I knew I couldn't stay here, but I also knew I was in no condition to keep driving. I decided to try to get some sleep, right there in the cab. I'd wake up early, get back on the road before sunrise. Maybe by then this would all feel like a bad dream. But as I drifted off, one thought kept nagging at me. What if he comes back? I woke with a start, disoriented and drenched in sweat. The digital clock on the dashboard read 2:37 a.m. For a moment I couldn't remember where I was or why I was sleeping in the cab. Then it all came flooding back. The chase, the confrontation, the mysterious departure. The rest area was pitch black, the only light coming from a half moon peeking through the clouds. I sat up, rubbing my eyes, trying to shake off the remnants of a nightmare I couldn't quite remember. Something about metal, twisting and writhing like it was alive. As my eyes adjusted to the darkness, I noticed something odd. The air outside seemed to be shimmering, like heat waves rising from hot asphalt. but it was the middle of the night and the temperature had dropped considerably. I leaned closer to the window, squinting to get a better look. That's when I heard it, a low, rhythmic humming, almost below the threshold of hearing. It seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I felt it more than heard it, a vibration that set my teeth on edge and made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I reached for the keys, ready to start the engine and get the hell out of there, but something made me hesitate. Through the shimmering air, I could see shapes moving in the darkness. At first, I thought it might be animals, maybe deer or coyotes, but as I watched, the shapes began to coalesce into something else. They were humanoid, but wrong somehow. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. They moved with an unnatural grace, gliding rather than walking across the parking lot, and they were coming straight for my truck. Panic gripped me. I jammed the key into the ignition, but the engine wouldn't turn over. The humming grew louder, and I could feel the truck beginning to vibrate. The shapes were getting closer, their features becoming more distinct. I didn't want to see, but I couldn't look away. Their faces, if you could call them that, were featureless voids, save for a single, glowing point of light where eyes should be. As they approached, tendrils of that shimmering air seemed to reach out, probing the truck, searching for a way in. I was trapped, helpless, as the creatures surrounded my rig. The humming had become a roar, drowning out my own panicked breathing. Just as I thought I couldn't take it anymore, that I would lose my mind from the terror and the noise, everything went silent. The shapes vanished, the air cleared, and the night was still once more. I sat there shaking, unable to process what I had just witnessed. Was it real? Had I imagined it all? The residual fear told me it wasn't just a dream, but my mind struggled to accept what my eyes had seen. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, I finally managed to start the truck. I pulled out of the rest area as fast as I dared, my hands still trembling on the wheel. I didn't know what had happened last night, but I knew one thing for certain. I needed to deliver this cargo and get as far away from here as possible. Little did I know the horrors of the night were just the beginning. The sun was well above the horizon by the time I felt safe enough to pull over at a truck stop. My nerves were shot, and I desperately needed coffee and a moment to collect my thoughts. As I sat in the dingy diner nursing a cup of bitter coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in over my head. What were those things I saw last night? And what did they have to do with the man in the black sedan? I rubbed my temples, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I overheard a conversation from the booth behind me. "Did you hear about that trucker they found outside of Millbrook?" one voice said. "They're saying he was poisoned by his cargo, some kind of experimental metal or something." My blood ran cold. Millbrook. That was where I'd picked up my load. "Yeah, I heard," another voice replied. "They say his body was all twisted up, like the bones had melted. Never seen anything like it." I'd heard enough. I threw some money on the table and hurried back to my truck. As I climbed into the cab, I caught sight of my reflection in the side mirror. I looked haggard, eyes sunken and skin pale. But it wasn't my appearance that made me pause. It was what I saw behind me. For just a moment, I could have sworn I saw a flicker of that shimmering air, and within it the outline of one of those impossible figures from the night before. I whirled around, but there was nothing there, just rows of parked trucks and the bustling activity of the truck stop. I shook my head, trying to clear it. I was letting my imagination run wild. I needed to focus on the job at hand, delivering this cargo and getting home. But as I started the engine, a nagging doubt crept in. What exactly was I carrying? I pulled out my manifest, scanning it for details I might have missed before. The description was vague, experimental alloy components. But there was something else. A warning label I hadn't noticed before. Caution, material may be unstable under certain conditions. Handle with extreme care. My mind raced back to the radio show I'd half listened to yesterday. Something about metal alloys with strange properties. Was there a connection? And if so, what did it mean for me? I knew I should probably contact the company, maybe even the authorities, but something held me back. A gut feeling that doing so would only make things worse. No, I decided. The best thing to do was to complete the delivery as quickly as possible and wash my hands of this whole affair. With a deep breath, I pulled out of the truck stop and back onto the highway, The sooner I got to New Mexico, the better. But as the miles rolled by, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every now and then I'd catch a glimpse of something in my mirrors, a flash of black paint, a shimmer in the air, only for it to disappear when I looked again. The cargo in my trailer suddenly felt like a ticking time bomb. What if those things from last night came back? What if the man in the black sedan reappeared? And most terrifying of all, what if the stories about the trucker in Millbrook were true? As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the highway, I realized that this journey was far from over, and the real dangers might be lurking right behind me in the very cargo I was tasked to deliver. The New Mexico border loomed ahead, a sign promising salvation and the end of this nightmare. But as I crossed state lines, my relief was short-lived. In my side mirror, I spotted a familiar sight, the black sedan closing in fast. My heart raced as I pressed down on the accelerator, urging my rig to go faster. The sedan matched my speed effortlessly, and I could see the driver's face clearly now. It was the same man from the rest area, his cold eyes fixed on me with predatory focus. I weaved through traffic, using the bulk of my truck to create obstacles for my pursuer. But he was relentless, always finding a way to keep pace. As we barreled down the highway, I noticed something strange. The air around the sedan seemed to shimmer, just like it had during that terrifying night at the rest area. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the connection. Somehow, this man was linked to those impossible creatures I'd seen, and he was after my cargo. Suddenly, my truck lurched violently. Warning lights flashed on the dashboard as the engine sputtered. I guided the rig to the shoulder, barely managing to keep it under control as it ground to a halt. Smoke billowed from under the hood, and I knew I was in trouble. The sedan pulled up behind me, and the man got out. This time there was nowhere for me to run. As he approached, I could see that shimmering air clinging to him like a second skin. He stopped a few feet from my door, his face in a motionless mask. "Hand over the cargo," he said, his voice as cold and hard as steel. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles white. "What is it? What's so important about this stuff?" A flicker of something, surprise maybe, crossed his face. "You mean you don't know? They didn't tell you?" Before I could respond, a sound like tearing metal filled the air. We both turned to look at the trailer. To my horror, I saw the metal of the trailer warping and bulging, as if something inside was trying to break free. The man's eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw fear in them. "It's too late," he muttered. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before either of us could move, the trailer burst open with a deafening screech. What emerged was beyond comprehension, a writhing mass of metal, twisting and reshaping itself into impossible forms. It pulsed with an otherworldly energy, tendrils of shimmering air surrounding it. The man grabbed my arm, yanking me out of the truck. "Run," he shouted, and for once I didn't hesitate to follow his command. We sprinted away from the highway into the desert landscape. Behind us, I could hear the sound of metal grinding and warping, accompanied by an unearthly howl that made my blood run cold. As we ran, the man began to explain between gasps for air. "It's a new type of alloy," he said, "designed to adapt and evolve, but something went wrong. It became alive." I wanted to laugh at the absurdity of it all, but the terror coursing through my veins kept me focused on survival. "Who are you?" I managed to ask as we scrambled over rocky terrain. "Government Containment," he replied. "We've been trying to track down all the samples before they could activate. Your cargo was the last known batch." We reached the top of a small hill and paused to catch our breath. Looking back, I saw my truck engulfed in a swirling mass of metal and energy. The highway was empty. Thankfully, no other vehicles had been caught in this nightmare. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice shaking. The man pulled out a phone, one far more advanced than any I'd seen before. "I'm calling in a containment team, but it might be too late. That thing, it's evolving faster than we anticipated." As if in response to his words, the mass of metal began to take shape. It formed into a colossal figure, vaguely humanoid but constantly shifting and changing. Its head turned in our direction, and I felt a wave of cold dread wash over me. "It's aware," the man whispered. "God help us all." The metallic monstrosity began to move towards us, each step causing the ground to tremble. The man, whose name he finally told me was Reeves, pulled out a small device from his pocket. "Last resort," he said grimly. "An electromagnetic pulse. It might disrupt the alloy's cohesion long enough for us to... well, I'm not sure what, but it's all we've got." As the creature drew nearer, I could see flashes of the impossible figures I'd witnessed at the rest area within its constantly shifting form. Whatever this thing was, it was the amalgamation of metal and those otherworldly beings. Reeves activated the device, and a wave of energy pulsed outward. The effect on the creature was immediate. It staggered, its form destabilizing into a chaotic swirl of metal and shimmering air. But the respite was brief. Within moments it began to reform, adapting to the assault. "Run!" Reeves shouted, and we took off again, this time heading towards a cluster of rock formations in the distance. Behind us, the creature let out a roar that seemed to shake the very air around us. As we ran, Reeves explained more about the alloy. It was designed to be the ultimate adaptive material, capable of changing its properties in response to any environment or stimulus. But during testing, it had somehow merged with another dimension, incorporating entities that defied our understanding of physics. We reached the rocks just as the creature caught up to us. Reeves pushed me into a narrow crevice, then turned to face the monstrosity. He pulled out another device. This one looked like a gun, but like nothing I'd ever seen before. "Get as far away as you can," he told me. "If this doesn't work, well, just run." Before I could protest, he stepped out to confront the creature. The gun in his hand hummed to life, emitting a beam of energy that carved into the metallic beast. Where it struck, the creature's form seemed to freeze, becoming inert. For a moment, I dared to hope that Reeves might actually win this impossible battle. But then the creature adapted once again. It split into multiple smaller entities, each one a nightmarish fusion of metal and otherworldly matter. Reeves fought valiantly, his weapon taking out the smaller creatures one by one. But there were too many. I watched in horror as they swarmed him, their forms merging around him. I wanted to help, to do something, anything. But what could I do against something like this? I was just a truck driver, in way over my head. As Reeves disappeared into the metallic mass, his last shout echoed across the desert. "The failsafe! Use the failsafe!" I had no idea what he meant, but I knew I couldn't just stand there. I darted out from my hiding place, scanning the ground where Reeves had been standing. There, half buried in the sand, I saw a small, cylindrical object with a red button on top. The failsafe. I lunged for it just as one of the metallic creatures noticed me. As its cold, inhuman form reached for me, I pressed the button. The world went white. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I came to, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No unearthly howls, no grinding metal. Just the quiet whisper of wind over sand. I opened my eyes, wincing at the bright sunlight. As my vision cleared, I saw that the landscape around me had been transformed. Where the creature had been, there was now a perfect hemispherical crater, the sand at its edges turned to glass. Of Reeves and the metallic monstrosities, there was no sign. I staggered to my feet, my whole body aching. In the distance, I could hear the sound of helicopters approaching. The containment team Reeves had mentioned, no doubt. As I stood there, waiting for whatever came next, I tried to process everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to believe it had all been some kind of hallucination, a stress-induced breakdown. But the devastation around me was all too real. The helicopters landed, and men in hazmat suits swarmed out. They approached me cautiously, scanners in hand. After determining that I wasn't a threat, they began to question me. I told them everything from the moment I picked up the cargo to the final confrontation. They listened impassively. Then one of them, clearly the leader, stepped forward. "You've been through quite an ordeal, mister." He paused, waiting for me to supply my name. I remained silent. Something in Reeves' final moments had struck a chord with me. This whole situation was bigger than I could comprehend, and I had a feeling that anonymity might be my best protection going forward. The leader nodded, seeming to understand. "Very well. You'll need to come with us for debriefing and observation. Standard procedure." As they led me to one of the helicopters, I took one last look at the devastation behind me. My truck, my cargo, Reeves, all gone, and with them, the life I had known. The helicopter lifted off, carrying me towards an uncertain future. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. I would never look at the open road the same way again. As we flew away from the scene, I caught a glimpse of something in the desert below. For just a moment I could have sworn I saw a flicker of that now familiar shimmering air, and within it, the outline of one of those impossible figures. I blinked, and it was gone, but the chill that ran down my spine remained. Whatever had happened here, whatever I had become entangled with, I had a feeling it was far from over. The trouble with Pine Ridge wasn't the people, though they could be a strange bunch. It was the forest. Always something about that damn forest. My name is Bart Crowley, and I never really fit in anywhere. Life had a way of knocking me down, but I always got back up. That was until the summer of 1993 when I learned that some hits are meant to put you down for good. I had just moved into a little cabin on the outskirts of Pine Ridge, trying to get away from the mess I'd made back in San Francisco. The town seemed like a good place to start fresh, even if it did have that eerie reputation. The cabin was simple, but it had all I needed: a bedroom, a small kitchen, and a living area with a fireplace. The surrounding woods provided a sense of isolation that I craved. As I unpacked my meager belongings, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. The forest pressed close to the cabin, its dense canopy blocking out much of the sunlight. Even in the middle of the day, shadows seemed to linger longer than they should. The first week passed in a blur of setting up and getting to know the lay of the land. I made a few trips into town for supplies, nodding politely to the locals but keeping my distance. Their wary glances and hushed whispers when they thought I wasn't looking didn't escape my notice. It was clear that outsiders weren't common in Pine Ridge. On my last trip to the general store, I overheard a conversation that made my skin crawl. Two old-timers were huddled in a corner, their voices low but urgent. "Another one gone missing up in the North Woods," one of them said, shaking his head. "Third one this year." "Damn forest takes what it wants," the other replied, his eyes darting around as if afraid the trees themselves might be listening. "Best to stay clear, especially after dark." I brushed it off as small-town superstition, but their words stuck with me, a splinter in my mind that I couldn't quite shake loose. As Friday night rolled around, I found myself sitting on the cabin's small porch, nursing a beer and staring into the gathering darkness. The forest seemed to come alive at night, filled with rustling leaves and distant, unidentifiable sounds. A cool breeze carried the scent of pine and something else, something old and musty that I couldn't quite place. I decided then that I needed to face whatever it was that had the locals so spooked. Tomorrow I'd take a hike into those woods and see for myself what all the fuss was about. Little did I know that decision would change my life forever. Saturday morning dawned crisp and clear. I woke early, my mind already racing with thoughts of the day ahead. As I sipped my coffee, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I glanced out the window, half expecting to see a face peering back at me from the tree line. But there was nothing. Just the endless sea of green, swaying gently in the morning breeze. I packed a small rucksack with water, some energy bars, and a basic first aid kit. As an afterthought, I grabbed the hunting knife my father had given me years ago. I'd never been much for hunting, but having it made me feel a little more prepared for whatever I might encounter. The trail started just behind my cabin, a narrow path that snaked its way into the heart of the forest. As I set out, the morning dew soaked through my boots, and the smell of damp earth filled my nostrils. The first mile or so was pleasant enough. Sunlight filtered through the canopy, creating dappled patterns on the forest floor. Birds chirped overhead, and a gentle breeze rustled the leaves. But as I ventured deeper, the atmosphere began to change. The trees grew denser, their branches intertwining overhead to block out most of the sunlight. The air became thick and heavy, filled with the musty scent I'd noticed the night before. The bird songs faded away, replaced by an eerie silence broken only by the sound of my own footsteps. I tried to shake off the growing sense of unease, telling myself it was just my imagination running wild. But I couldn't ignore the way the hairs on the back of my neck stood up, or how my eyes kept darting from shadow to shadow, searching for something. Around noon, I came across a small clearing. Sunlight streamed down, a welcome respite from the gloom of the dense forest. I decided to take a break, sitting on a fallen log and pulling out one of my energy bars. As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being observed. My eyes scanned the tree line, searching for any sign of movement. That's when I saw it, or thought I did. A shadow, large and fleeting, moved just beyond the tree line. I blinked, and it was gone. My heart raced as I stood up, peering into the darkness between the trees. "Hello?" I called out, my voice sounding small and afraid in the vast silence of the forest. There was no response, just the soft rustle of leaves in the wind. I tried to rationalize it, a deer maybe, or even a bear. But deep down, I knew it was something else, something that didn't belong in these woods any more than I did. With shaking hands, I packed up my things and started back the way I came. But nothing looked familiar. The trail seemed to twist and turn in ways I didn't remember, leading me deeper into the forest instead of back to my cabin. Panic began to set in as I realized I was lost. The forest seemed to close in around me, the trees looming overhead like silent sentinels. Shadows danced at the edge of my vision, always disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. And all the while, that feeling of being watched grew stronger. As the day wore on and the light began to fade, I knew I was in trouble. I'd been walking for hours, and there was still no sign of my cabin or the edge of the forest. The temperature dropped, and a thick mist began to roll in, further obscuring my surroundings. That's when I heard it. A low, guttural sound that was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. It wasn't quite a growl, not quite a roar, but something in between that sent chills down my spine. And it was close. I froze, my hand instinctively reaching for the knife at my belt. The sound came again, closer this time, followed by the snap of a branch somewhere to my left. Slowly I turned towards the noise, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might burst from my chest. And there, in the gathering gloom, I saw a pair of eyes watching me. They glowed with an unnatural light, and as I stared, unable to look away, I realized they were set in a face that was both familiar and terrifyingly alien. The creature stepped forward, and I got my first clear look at what had been stalking me through the forest. It was then that I knew, with absolute certainty, that my life would never be the same again. The creature that emerged from the shadows defied description, a nightmarish blend of man and beast that sent waves of primal terror coursing through my body. It stood nearly 7 feet tall, its body gaunt and twisted, covered in matted fur that seemed to absorb the fading light. But it was the face that truly horrified me, a grotesque mockery of human features stretched over an elongated skull, with eyes that glowed with an otherworldly intelligence. I stood frozen, unable to run, unable even to breathe. The creature tilted its head, regarding me with an almost curious expression. Then, without warning, it let out that bone-chilling sound again, a low, guttural noise that seemed to reverberate through the very trees around us. My survival instincts finally kicked in, and I turned to run. But the forest floor, treacherous with roots and fallen branches, conspired against me. I stumbled, my ankle twisting painfully as I fell. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the sharp pain, and ran blindly through the woods. Branches whipped at my face, leaving stinging cuts. My lungs burned with each desperate breath. Behind me, I could hear the creature in pursuit, its movements unnaturally fast and fluid through the dense undergrowth. I don't know how long I ran. Time seemed to lose all meaning in that nightmarish chase, but eventually my body betrayed me. My legs gave out and I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air. I rolled onto my back, expecting to see the creature looming over me, but there was nothing. Just the silent, indifferent forest, stretching out in every direction. As my breathing slowly returned to normal, I took stock of my situation. I was hopelessly lost, injured, and night was falling fast. And somewhere out there, that thing was still hunting me. I knew I couldn't stay where I was. I had to keep moving, had to find my way back to the cabin. Using a fallen branch as a makeshift crutch, I pushed myself to my feet and started limping in what I hoped was the direction of home. The forest had taken on a dreamlike quality in the twilight, shadows merging and shifting in ways that played tricks on my eyes. More than once I thought I saw the creature watching me from behind a tree or crouched in the underbrush, only for it to vanish when I looked directly at it. As full darkness fell, a new terror gripped me. I was trapped in this forest with that monster, blind and helpless. Every sound, the rustle of leaves, the creak of branches, the scurrying of small animals, sent fresh waves of fear through me. I stumbled on, using my hands to feel my way forward, jumping at every real or imagined noise. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. Time had lost all meaning. I was exhausted, my ankle throbbing with each step, my mind reeling from the impossible encounter. That's when I saw it, a faint glimmer of light through the trees. Hope surged through me. My cabin. Somehow, miraculously, I'd found my way back. I limped faster, ignoring the pain, fixated on that promise of safety. As I broke through the tree line, I nearly wept with relief at the sight of my small cabin. I staggered to the door, fumbling with the key, constantly glancing over my shoulder at the dark forest behind me. Finally inside, I slammed the door shut and locked it, then collapsed to the floor, my back against the solid wood. I was safe. I was home. But as my racing heart began to slow, a new, horrible realization dawned on me. I wasn't safe at all. I'd seen something out there in those woods, something that shouldn't exist, and now it knew where I lived. As if in response to my thoughts, a heavy thud shook the cabin door behind me, then another, and another. Something wanted in, and the thin wooden walls suddenly felt terribly, hopelessly inadequate. The pounding on the door intensified, each impact sending vibrations through my body. I scrambled away, my eyes darting around the cabin for anything I could use as a weapon. My gaze fell on the old hunting rifle mounted above the fireplace, a relic left by the cabin's previous owner that I'd never thought I'd need. With shaking hands, I grabbed the rifle and checked the chamber. It was loaded. I'd never been much of a shot, but at that moment, that rifle felt like my only lifeline. The assault on the door stopped as suddenly as it had begun, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow even more terrifying. I stood in the center of the room, rifle pointed at the door, straining to hear any sound of movement outside. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching into an eternity. Then, a new sound, a slow, deliberate scratching along the outside wall of the cabin. It moved from one side to the other, as if the creature was testing the structure, looking for weaknesses. I pivoted slowly, trying to track the sound, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The scratching stopped at one of the windows, and I caught a glimpse of movement in the darkness beyond the glass. Those glowing eyes appeared, peering in at me with that same unnerving intelligence I'd seen in the forest. Our gazes locked, and in that moment, I felt something brush against my mind. An alien presence, cold and ancient and utterly inhuman. I recoiled, both physically and mentally, nearly dropping the rifle in shock. The eyes disappeared, and the scratching resumed its circuit around the cabin. I realized with growing horror that the creature was toying with me, drawing out the siege to wear down my defenses. As the night wore on, the psychological toll began to mount. The creature would disappear for long stretches, leaving me in suspense, jumping at every creak of the cabin's old wood. Then it would return, scratching at the walls or windows, occasionally throwing its weight against the door in a bone-jarring impact. I didn't dare sleep, didn't dare take my eyes off the points of entry for even a moment. My body ached from the constant tension, and my injured ankle throbbed mercilessly. But worse than the physical discomfort was the mental strain. Every shadow seemed to move, every sound a potential threat. I found myself questioning my own senses, wondering if I was losing my grip on reality. Was this creature really out there? Or had I imagined the whole thing, driven mad by the isolation and the whispered legends of the forest? But then those eyes would appear again at a window, or that unearthly howl would pierce the night, and I knew with sickening certainty that this was all too real. As the first light of dawn began to creep over the horizon, the siege suddenly intensified. The creature threw itself against the door with renewed vigor, the wood creaking and splintering under the assault. I realized with a jolt of terror that it was making its final push, unwilling to let its prey escape. The door burst inward in a shower of splinters, and the creature barreled into the cabin. I raised the rifle and fired, the shot deafening in the confined space. The creature staggered but didn't fall. I fired again and again, each impact driving it back but seemingly doing little real damage. In desperation, I lunged for the kitchenette, grabbing a cast-iron skillet from the stove. As the creature came at me again, I swung with all my might, connecting with its head in a sickening crunch. The thing went down, twitching and writhing on the floor. Without thinking, I brought the skillet down again and again, driven by pure survival instinct and blind terror. When I finally came to my senses, the creature lay still. Dark, viscous fluid that I hesitated to call blood pooled around its misshapen head. I stood there, panting, the skillet still clutched in my trembling hands, waiting for it to move again. But it didn't. Somehow, impossibly, I had survived the night. As sunlight began to filter into the destroyed cabin, I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and the sheer improbability of my continued existence. I didn't know what this thing was or where it had come from, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I couldn't stay in Pine Ridge. Not for one more night, not for one more hour. With that thought driving me, I began to pack, casting frequent glances at the motionless form on my cabin floor. I had to get out. I had to get far, far away from this place and never look back. The drive out of Pine Ridge was a blur. I threw what little I owned into my beat-up old truck and hit the road, my knuckles white on the steering wheel as I resisted the urge to look back. Every shadow on the road made me flinch. Every unexpected sound had me swerving. I half expected to see that creature in my rearview mirror, somehow alive and in pursuit. But nothing followed me. As the miles stretched out behind me and the sun climbed higher in the sky, I began to feel the first stirrings of relief. I'd made it. I'd survived. It wasn't until I crossed the state line that I allowed myself to really think about what had happened. The reality of the situation crashed down on me like a physical weight. I'd encountered something impossible, something that shouldn't exist outside of nightmares and horror movies. And I'd killed it. Or at least, I thought I had. A wave of nausea hit me, and I had to pull over to the side of the road. I stumbled out of the truck and emptied the meager contents of my stomach onto the sun-baked asphalt. As I straightened up, wiping my mouth with the back of my hand, a horrible thought struck me. What if it wasn't dead? What if it had just been stunned, playing possum until I left? The image of those inhuman eyes snapping open as soon as my truck pulled away from the cabin filled my mind. I leaned against the truck, suddenly lightheaded. No, I couldn't think like that. It was dead. It had to be dead. I'd seen the damage I'd done, felt the sickening impact of metal on bone. Nothing could have survived that, right? But even as I tried to reassure myself, doubt gnawed at me. I realized with a sinking feeling that I would never truly know for certain. That uncertainty would haunt me for years to come. I got back in the truck and kept driving, putting as much distance between myself and Pine Ridge as I could. I ended up in a small town in Oregon, about as far from dense forests as I could get. I found a cheap apartment and a job at a local garage, trying to piece together some semblance of a normal life. But normalcy was elusive. Sleep became my enemy. Every night, I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, convinced I'd heard that unearthly howl or caught a glimpse of those glowing eyes outside my window. I started sleeping with the lights on, a baseball bat within easy reach. During the day, I'd jump at unexpected noises, my heart racing at the slightest provocation. Shadows seemed to move in my peripheral vision, always disappearing when I turned to look directly at them. I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, the trauma of that night manifesting itself in 1,000 little ways. But that knowledge didn't make it any easier to bear. I tried to talk about it once, to a girl I'd been seeing for a few weeks. She listened with growing disbelief as I haltingly recounted my experience in Pine Ridge. When I finished, she gave me a look of mingled pity and fear, made some excuse about an early morning, and left. I never saw her again. After that, I kept it to myself. What was the point? No one would believe me. Hell, half the time I wasn't sure I believed it myself. Maybe I had imagined the whole thing. Maybe I'd had some kind of mental break, conjured up a monster to explain away my own failings and fears. But then I'd catch sight of the scars on my body, claw marks on my arms from my desperate flight through the forest, the slight limp from my twisted ankle that never quite healed right. And I'd know. It had been real. All of it. Months passed, then years. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the acute terror began to fade, replaced by a constant low-level anxiety that became my new normal. I learned to function, to go through the motions of everyday life, but I never truly relaxed. I was always watching, always waiting for the other shoe to drop. It was a Friday night, nearly 2 years after my escape from Pine Ridge, when everything changed again. I was sitting at the bar of my local watering hole, nursing a beer and trying to ignore the basketball game blaring on the TV overhead. That's when he sat down next to me. He was an older guy, probably in his 60s, with a weathered face and sharp, intelligent eyes. He ordered a whiskey, neat, then turned to me with a look that made my blood run cold. "You're Crowley, right?" he said, his voice low and gravelly. "The guy from Pine Ridge?" I tensed, ready to bolt. How did he know? Who was he? But before I could respond, he continued. "Name's Quinn Hargrave. I used to be a ranger up in those parts. Heard about your encounter." I stared at him, my mind racing. This was it. The moment I'd been dreading for 2 years. Someone had come to drag me back into that nightmare. But what he said next changed everything. "I believe you, son," he said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Because you're not the first, and I'm damn sure you won't be the last." Quinn's words hung in the air between us, heavy with implication. I felt a mix of emotions wash over me. Relief at being believed, fear at the confirmation that what I'd experienced was real, and a burning curiosity to know more. "What do you mean I'm not the first?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Quinn glanced around the bar, then leaned in closer. "Not here," he said. "Too many ears. You got a place we can talk privately?" Every instinct told me to say no, to run as far and as fast as I could from this man and the memories he was dredging up. But a deeper part of me, the part that had been seeking answers for 2 long years, wouldn't let me walk away. I nodded, paid for our drinks, and led Quinn back to my small apartment. As we entered, I couldn't help but feel exposed, vulnerable. I'd spent so long trying to forget, to move on, and now I was inviting the past right back into my life. Quinn settled into my worn armchair while I perched on the edge of the couch, tense and ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. Old habits die hard. I've been tracking these incidents for nearly 30 years now, Quinn began, his eyes distant. Started back when I was just a rookie ranger, fresh out of training. Found a hiker, or what was left of him, up in the North Woods. Official report said it was a bear attack, but I knew better. Bears don't leave claw marks 8 feet up a tree trunk. I shuddered, remembering the impossible reach of the creature I'd encountered. Over the years, I started to piece things together, Quinn continued. Disappearances, strange sightings, livestock mutilations, all centered around Pine Ridge and that damn forest. Most folks wrote it off as tall tales or superstition, but I knew there was something out there, something that didn't fit into our neat little view of the world. "What is it?" I asked, dreading the answer but needing to know. Quinn shook his head. "Wish I could tell you, son. Native legends talk about skinwalkers, shapeshifters that blur the line between man and beast. Some think it's some kind of undiscovered species, an evolutionary offshoot that's managed to stay hidden. Me, I don't put a name to it. Names have power, and the last thing we need is to give these things more power than they already have." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a worn leather notebook. "I've documented everything I could find. Eyewitness accounts, physical evidence, patterns of activity. It's not much, but it's a start." As Quinn flipped through the pages, I saw crude sketches that matched my memories all too well. Long, gangly limbs, glowing eyes, that twisted, not quite human face. My hands began to shake. "Why are you telling me this?" I managed to ask. Quinn's eyes met mine, filled with a mixture of determination and what looked like guilt. "Because you're one of the few who've encountered these things and lived to tell about it, and because I need your help." "My help?" I echoed, disbelief coloring my voice. "I've spent 2 years trying to forget what happened, trying to convince myself it wasn't real. And now you want me to, what, go hunting for these monsters?" "Not hunting," Quinn said, shaking his head. "Documenting, understanding. These things are out there, whether we like it or not. The more we know about them, the better chance we have of protecting ourselves and others." I stood up, pacing the small confines of my apartment. "You're insane. I can't go back there. I won't. Quinn watched me, his expression understanding but unyielding. You don't have to go back to Pine Ridge. These things, they're not confined to one forest. They're spreading, Crowley. Reports are coming in from all over the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, even parts of Northern California. They're getting bolder, and people are dying. His words hit me like a physical blow. I'd thought I was safe here, that I'd left the nightmare behind in Pine Ridge. But if what Quinn was saying was true, what exactly are you proposing? I asked, my voice tight. Quinn leaned forward, his eyes intense. I'm putting together a team. People who've encountered these things and survived. People with skills we can use. We track sightings, gather evidence, try to understand what we're dealing with. And when necessary, we intervene. I shook my head, a humorless laugh escaping me. You're talking about some kind of monster hunting squad? This isn't a movie, Quinn. These things are real, and they're deadly. I know that better than most, Quinn said, his voice suddenly hard. I've lost friends to these creatures. Good people who didn't deserve what happened to them. I'm not asking you to be a hero, Crowley. I'm asking you to help prevent what happened to you from happening to others. His words struck a chord. How many nights had I lain awake, wondering if I could have done something differently, if I could have warned someone, saved someone. I need to think about this, I said finally. Quinn nodded, standing up. He placed his notebook on the coffee table. Take your time, read through this. If you decide you want in, my number's on the last page. If not, burn it. But whatever you decide, watch your back. Because now that you know, really know, you can't unknow it. And knowledge in this case is both power and danger. As Quinn left, I sank back onto the couch, my eyes fixed on the innocent-looking notebook. I knew that opening it would change everything again, but I also knew that I couldn't walk away, not now. Not when I finally had a chance to make sense of what had happened to me. With a deep breath, I reached for the notebook, ready to dive back into the nightmare I'd spent so long trying to escape. The next few days passed in a blur of sleepless nights and caffeine-fueled research. Quinn's notebook was a Pandora's box of horrors, each page revealing new depths to the nightmare I thought I'd left behind. Sketches, witness accounts, and theories filled the worn pages, painting a picture of a hidden world existing alongside our own, full of creatures that defied explanation. I cross-referenced Quinn's notes with news reports and online forums, uncovering a pattern of unexplained disappearances and strange sightings that stretched back decades. The more I dug, the more I realized that what I'd experienced in Pine Ridge was just the tip of a very large, very dangerous iceberg. On the third day, as I sat surrounded by printouts and empty coffee cups, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize. Crowley, Quinn's gruff voice came through before I could even say hello. We've got a situation. How fast can you get to Brookings? I hesitated, my mind racing. Brookings was a small coastal town in southern Oregon, about a 5-hour drive from where I was. I haven't decided yet, Quinn. I told you I needed time. Time's up, son, Quinn replied, his tone urgent. There's been an attack. 2 hikers missing, 1 found. Well, let's just say it matches the pattern. Local authorities are calling it a bear attack, but we both know better. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it, the moment of truth. I could hang up, pack my bags, and run again, find some remote corner of the world and pray that these things never found me. Or I could face my fears head-on, maybe even help prevent others from going through what I had. Give me the details, I heard myself say. I'll be there as soon as I can. The drive to Brookings was tense, every mile bringing me closer to a confrontation I'd been avoiding for years. I'd packed hastily clothes, Quinn's notebook, and the old hunting rifle I'd bought after leaving Pine Ridge. I told myself it was just a precaution, but deep down, I knew better. Quinn met me at a small motel on the outskirts of town. He looked older than I remembered, the lines on his face deeper, his eyes shadowed with fatigue and worry. Glad you made it, he said, ushering me into his room. Inside, maps and photographs were spread across every available surface. 2 other people looked up as we entered, a woman with short graying hair and a scar running down the left side of her face, and a younger man with haunted eyes that I recognized all too well. They'd seen what I'd seen. They knew. This is Mara, Quinn introduced the woman, ex-military, trained tracker, and this is Ethan. He's got a knack for patterns, helps us predict where these things might show up next. I nodded to them both, feeling a strange mix of comfort and unease at being around others who understood. "What's the situation?" I asked, focusing on the task at hand. Quinn pointed to a map of the nearby Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. 2 days ago, a couple of college kids went hiking here. Only one made it back, babbling about monsters in the woods. Search and rescue found what was left of his friend yesterday morning. I swallowed hard, pushing down the memories that threatened to overwhelm me. "And you're sure it's one of them?" Mara spoke up, her voice surprisingly soft. "The claw marks, the level of destruction, it fits the profile. Plus, there have been reports of strange noises and livestock disappearances in the area for weeks now." "We think it's establishing a new hunting ground," Ethan added, his fingers tracing a pattern on one of the maps. "If we're right, it'll strike again soon." I looked at the three of them, these strangers who were now my allies in a war I never asked to be part of. "So what's the plan? We can't exactly go to the authorities with this." Quinn's expression was grim. "We go in ourselves, track this thing, gather what evidence we can, and if necessary, we put it down." The finality in his voice sent a chill down my spine. This was real. We were really going to hunt one of these creatures. As if reading my thoughts, Quinn placed a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to come on the hunt if you're not ready, but we could use your experience, your insight." I looked at the maps, at the photos of the forest that looked so much like the one that had nearly claimed my life. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to get as far away from this as possible. But I knew I couldn't, not again, not when I had the chance to make a difference. "I'm in," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "Whatever it takes, I'm in." Quinn nodded, a mix of relief and determination in his eyes. "All right, people, we move out at first light, get some rest. Tomorrow, we hunt." As the others began to prepare, I stepped outside, needing a moment to process everything. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of the nearby ocean. I looked up at the stars, so bright and clear away from the city lights. Somewhere out there in the darkness of the forest, a monster was waiting. But this time, I wasn't alone. This time I was ready, or so I hoped. The pre-dawn air was thick with fog as we made our way into the Rogue River Siskiyou National Forest. The world seemed muffled, every sound dampened by the heavy mist that clung to the trees. It was eerily reminiscent of that fateful day in Pine Ridge, and I had to consciously control my breathing to keep the panic at bay. We moved in a tight formation, Quinn in the lead, then Mara, myself, and Ethan bringing up the rear. Each of us was armed, Quinn and Mara with high-powered rifles, Ethan with a tranquilizer gun, his idea in case we had a chance to capture rather than kill, and me with my trusty hunting rifle. As we penetrated deeper into the forest, the fog began to lift, revealing the wild beauty of the landscape. Under different circumstances, I might have appreciated it. But now every shadow held a potential threat, every rustle of leaves a possible ambush. Hours passed as we followed the trail Quinn and Mara had pieced together from ranger reports and their own reconnaissance. The forest grew denser, the underbrush thicker. It was slow going and the tension was palpable. It was nearing midday when Mara suddenly held up a hand, freezing us in our tracks. She crouched down, examining something on the forest floor that I couldn't see. "Tracks," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "Fresh, within the last hour." Quinn moved up to examine them, his face grim. "It's close, be ready." We continued on, moving slower now, every sense on high alert. The forest had gone quiet. No bird calls, no skittering of small animals. It was as if the whole world was holding its breath. That's when I saw it, a flash of movement in my peripheral vision, gone almost before I could register it. I spun, raising my rifle, but there was nothing there. "Did you see?" I started to ask, but Quinn cut me off with a sharp gesture. He'd seen it too. We all had. We formed a tight circle, backs to each other, scanning the surrounding forest. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure the others could hear it. The attack, when it came, was swift and brutal. It burst from the underbrush like a force of nature, all sinewy limbs and matted fur. In the daylight, it was even more terrifying than I remembered. Its eyes gleaming with malevolent intelligence, its mouth a jagged maw of razor-sharp teeth. Gunshots rang out, deafening in the confined space of the forest. The creature moved with impossible speed, dodging and weaving through our fire. I caught a glimpse of Mara going down, her rifle flying from her hands as the beast's claws raked across her arm. Quinn was shouting orders, trying to coordinate our defense, but the chaos of the moment made it nearly impossible to hear him. Ethan was fumbling with his tranquilizer gun, his face pale with terror. And then it was on me. The world narrowed to those glowing eyes and gnashing teeth. I fired, the recoil of the rifle slamming into my shoulder, but the creature was too fast. It knocked me off my feet, and I felt a searing pain across my chest as its claws found their mark. I hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of me. The creature loomed over me, its hot, fetid breath washing over my face. In that moment, I was sure I was going to die. But then Quinn was there, emptying his rifle into the beast's side. It let out an ear-splitting howl of pain and rage, turning its attention to this new threat. I scrambled to my feet, ignoring the burning pain in my chest, and raised my rifle again. What followed was a desperate, chaotic battle. We fought with everything we had, driven by pure survival instinct. Ethan managed to get off a shot with the tranquilizer, the dart finding its mark in the creature's thick hide, but it seemed to only enrage the beast further. In the end, it was Mara who turned the tide. Despite her injured arm, she managed to circle behind the creature while it was focused on Quinn and me. With a war cry that would have put fear into the heart of any natural predator, she emptied her sidearm into the back of the beast's head. The creature went down, twitching and howling. We didn't stop firing until it lay still, its body riddled with bullets. As the echo of the last shot faded away, an eerie silence fell over the forest. We stood there, panting and bleeding, staring at the motionless form of our nightmarish foe. Is it dead?" Ethan asked, his voice shaky. Quinn approached cautiously, his rifle still trained on the creature. He prodded it with the barrel of his gun. No response. "Yeah," he said, his voice a mix of relief and disbelief. "Yeah, it's dead." The adrenaline began to wear off, and the pain of my injuries hit me full force. I sank to my knees, suddenly exhausted beyond measure. Mara was already pulling out a first aid kit, her military training kicking in as she began to treat our wounds. As she worked, the reality of what we'd just accomplished began to sink in. We'd done it. We'd faced the monster and won. It hadn't been pretty, it hadn't been easy, but we'd survived. As Mara bandaged my chest, I looked at my newfound companions. We were battered, bloody, and shaken, but there was a newfound strength in our eyes. We'd faced our worst nightmares and come out the other side. Quinn was on his satellite phone, calling in a team to help clean up and document our kill. Ethan was taking samples and measurements of the creature, his scientific curiosity overcoming his fear. And me? I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Hope. We'd proven that these creatures could be fought, could be beaten. It wouldn't be easy, and the road ahead would be dangerous. But for the first time since that night in Pine Ridge, I felt like I had a purpose. As we made our way out of the forest, supporting each other, I knew that this was just the beginning. There were more creatures out there, more battles to be fought. But we'd be ready, we'd be stronger, and we'd face whatever came next, together. The nightmare wasn't over. In many ways, it was